Recording in progress.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our April 28th study session of the Rochester City Council. And I hope we will be able to get out of here before we have to go to the Government Center basement. But we have 3 items on our agenda today. First, factors influencing the budget. And then we'll discuss our City Council rules of procedure. And then the council will go into an executive session. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Administrator Allison Zelms, who will walk us through the factors influencing the budget.
Thank you, Council President, Council members, Mayor Norton, and members of the public, most of whom are staff members here today. Really excited, as you all know, to be here for the first presentation talking about the 2-year budget. It's like Christmas for me. So I will try to make this as expedient as possible, but also an opportunity for feedback, which is what it's intended. The very first kind of look at a long range, what we have in front of us, and not a lot of detail yet in the budget. So between myself and City or Deputy Administrator Aaron Parrish, who will lighten this up a little bit towards the middle, we will be presenting. So you are entering the phase of a 2-year budget. So it's really a forecast over those 2 years. It's always a continuation of a number of different policy items that have been set forward. It is a little bit difficult to get things done in a very short period of time in government, if you haven't noticed that yet in your time together. But that's because we are generally influencing and transforming the entire community. And so it is important that we be thoughtful about how that happens. So with that, we typically have set a set of strategic priorities, and so a little departure from what you would normally have during factors influencing the budget. We had started some strategic plan updates with the council. So what you see before you right now is old strategic priorities, and we thought we would kick this off with a little bit of an update from what we heard from the council during your first 2 study sessions, focusing on updating the strategic plan and get some of your reactions. So what we heard and what's next is that we wanted to update a bit the foundational principles and strategic priorities. So a little bit of play within those 2 topics. We're looking to understand if we're on the right track or if there's any major departure from what you had experienced in those meetings. And depending on what we talk about and if we're headed generally in the right direction, would you like us to schedule a follow-up, unlikely to be on a strategic or strategic priorities, unlikely to be on a study session based on your study session calendar. But depending on your feedback, we could find another date to be able to get together and really hash out anything where there's not agreement. So the first one is fairly simple. I've mentioned more than one time that this has always been the community vision. From the community plan, it was fitting a graphic, and we will let the graphic fit community vision now. So if there's general consensus on the community vision, and that which is from your community plan that was created with a lot of public input, we would recommend changing that to be the actual words community vision instead of city vision. It is a lot more inclusive of the broader community to say it that way. Also, we do have an organizational vision, which is internally, and also when we're hiring talent, what we are looking for and how we're providing day-to-day services to deliver on the community vision. So a vibrant, compassionate, innovative team. And then we start seeing changes from what the discussion was. So on foundational principles, what we heard was to move quality services from a strategic priority to a foundational principle. And the other thing that was discussed was community connections. And so when we had been talking about that at the last study session, one of the things that had been on the graphic, but not within the colored portions, was inclusive decision-making. So I don't know if there's any major concerns with making these the new foundational principles. Obviously, one of the things we'd want to talk through in the future, if we're on the right track, is what those mean to you.
Do you want to pause and kind of get feedback at this point?
I think that would be wonderful.
Okay. Any feedback? I really appreciate inclusive decision making up there and quality services. I think that's a appropriate place to put it from my perspective. Others' thoughts? Mayor Norton? Patrick, did you
Go
put
ahead.
your hand up? Mayor? Oh,
No comment about that.
oh, go ahead, Patrick.
Yeah,
I mean,
again,
Councilmember Keen, I'm being very informal.
yeah, I'm sorry. I wasn't ready to kind of go through these now, but I too can reflect back on our meeting and think these reflect what happened, especially the inclusive decision-making was a decision, just good discussion, quality services. The ones that, again, I'm just trying to get to that idea of like the foundation principles versus the strategic priorities and making sure they're specific enough to help in decision-making. So I'll just leave it at that.
Okay, let's continue.
I do have a quick,
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, just a quick
Councilmember Miller.
question about fiscal responsibility and sustainability. Is sustainability in that context purely fiscal? Because I know we'll talk about sustainability in the next. So just clarifying how that is interpreted.
Council Member Miller, Council President, I would say it depends on the project. So when I think about fiscal responsibility, depending on what we're trying to do, it might really be important to think about not just the sustainability of it fiscally, but the sustainability of it being how much does it cost to operate something. And so depending, like if we're building a project, for example, the heating and cooling of our buildings, it made sense to pay a little bit, well, some people would say a lot more upfront because the payback for that in your ongoing operating costs were significantly different. So I guess I see them as not interchangeable, but in today's day and age, it's hard to think about fiscal responsibility and sustainability of fiscal without also thinking about some components of sustainability could be longer term fiscally sustainable.
Okay.
So
But,
I think
but
it
again, in
depends.
this framing, fiscal is the operative word, and there might be some environmental sustainability impacts, but fiscal is the guiding principle here.
I believe that is the guiding principle, but that will depend on what the city council discusses as what you believe it is.
Any other comments at this point? Let's continue.
Thank you. So then the strategic priorities, and maybe we can move the captions a little bit, but we had looked at these major areas, and ironically, I thought it was equal, but now I'm looking at the slide again, and it was 6 foundational principles and 5 strategic priorities. So what we looked at here was adjusting to inclusive growth management, and you can read for yourselves what the sort of qualifier for that was. Based on discussion, and that separated this out from what used to be economic vibrancy and growth management, as well as some sub-bullets of affordable living. And so that was that discussion. Housing access was a new conversation separated out from affordable living. So you can start to see that, I guess, to Councilmember Keen's point, I would say these strategic priorities start to get more focused than the prior strategic priorities in what they actually mean and tell us. Economic resilience came separated out from economic vibrancy and growth management, and some discussion there. Transformational capital projects, and that we would deliver on those investments, that we will get them done and done well, was part of the discussion. And so if added, that would be, I would say, entirely new, but kind of came from a discussion of foundational principles. And then responsible environmental stewardship would come forward as a strategic priority. So that would be new, but also refocused from the foundational principles in that discussion.
Thoughts? Mayor?
The only thought that I had, I mean, this is interesting, and you kind of have to get your head around the new way of thinking about it. But the responsible environmental stewardship, I've wanted to have that there for a long time. The only thing that I find restrictive is that it's in city operations as opposed to just a period after responsibility. Because I think while from your perspective as administrator, I understand that you're focused on city functions because that's what you manage. As a member of this board, I want that responsibility and stewardship to be beyond just what we do, but how we set the community up for success outside of maybe just our operations. And one of the things I think about is development, for instance, and housing and infrastructure, which is not all city done, but we have a role when we approve projects at the table about asking things of people who might be coming here. So that was just one I thought was maybe a little tiny bit too narrow by just focusing it on city operations. So that would be my comment.
Councilmember Miller.
I guess just to build on that, one of the things I was just looking at, since language is important here, focusing on environmental sustainability, I wondered if instead of encourage, we might use a word like integrate, talking about the integration of environmental sustainability as a strategic priority across city operations and planning. And I even wonder then, thinking about action steps, if that leads into considerations in the RCAs of sustainability, defining how this integrates as a principle and strategic priority into the operations and planning. But I'm glad to see it here. I know we've heard a lot about it, this priority from the community. I heard about it all last fall. I think it's an unnecessary step. And I also wonder if we might define a couple of areas of prioritization. I mean, greenhouse gas emissions are one, but building energy, some of these other big projects, and because I think natural resources are an important one. I think city operations and planning are an important one. I just worry about greenhouse gas emissions perhaps as a core area of where that priority comes into play.
Councilmember Miller, did you say integrate as opposed to encourage? Is that the term you used?
That would be my suggestion.
I do like that. And getting back to the mayor's point about city operations, I kind of go back and forth on whether we should really just focus on our own house or include the wider community. I think that's important that we be champions for the wider community. But part of me says I do like integrate more than encourage if we're going to keep it focused on city operations. I think there is something to be said for really working on, like I said, our own house first and integrating those procedures that we need to be a model for the community. And I think then broadening it a little further in a future strategic priority may be where I'm leaning on it. Councilmember Keen.
Yeah, my comments again, I don't want to build off that stuff. Again, when I look at us going from the 3 we have right now to these 5, and I think of the discussions we had, I do see the new, there was more of that talk about environmental stewardship. I personally like it to be focused on what we do as a city and not imply a mission beyond our operations. But again, that's just me looking at how I use these. The other comment I have, I spent a lot of time talking about those transformational capital projects, but part of the way I want to use these is to not overload ourselves with other things that distract us from those things. And I guess when I think of this as a list of 5 and this is number 4, I just want to make sure we don't lose that. But that's my comment, and I'm good with going from the 3 to 5. I will make the comment that you mentioned there's 5 foundational principles, because one of them we're taking out of there.
Right.
So.
Other thoughts? Councilmember Doring.
Yeah, I was on the environmental stewardship strategic priority. I'm going to suggest that we cast that broader vision, that we just don't limit it to our city operations, that we really serve as a model and serve as a benchmark for all city businesses to become more environmentally sustainable. So I am fine with the encourage or our natural resources and integrate environmental responsibility with just the period there. So I'd like to cast that broader vision for the community.
Could I offer a reflection on that? Just
Yep.
from,
Go ahead.
at the risk of sounding bureaucratic. When I think of what you're saying, I don't necessarily view it differently, but if we were to cast that vision for others, in order to do that legally, I think that you would need to do that in some sort of city operation, whether that's changing your policies, which again, is maybe not encouraging or there would be a lot of city operational things that would still be guiding all of that. So for example, if Rochester Public Utilities, which they are, is going to invest in advanced metering, which provides individuals the opportunities to make decisions, part of the city operation is to communicate how it could be used. If we're talking about requiring businesses to, rather than encouraging, then I'm not sure, well, I would want to talk to legal about that, depending on what we were trying to accomplish. So, I mean, there would be a lot of different policies that you would need to adjust, put in place, and also make sure we're complying with state law in order to, depending on what the idea was for how to move something forward. So I'm not saying it couldn't be that. I'm just offering a little bit of guardrail that depending on what the intent is, you would have a lot of city operation that would be necessary in order to do that.
Councilmember Miller.
Just a follow-up question on that. Is there an opportunity, would you feel comfortable adding a third piece of this that's promoting in the broader community? Is that some sort of promotion, incentivization, a better way that we can focus in the operations, integration of environmental responsibility, and then leading a promotion of?
I feel like we should have a secondary discussion of this.
Sure.
And talk about how, are we moving from lengthening a strategic priority and creating action plans within them? Or are we, right, because I feel like some of these, for example, greenhouse gases and greenhouse gas emission is part of the action plan. So the more detail oriented of the existing strategic priorities, which don't call out environmental stewardship in a strategic priority, but talks about affordable living and quality services. So I guess my thought would be, depending on the outcome, and I think it would probably lend itself to more discussion and facilitation from the group about, making sure that whatever these words are, that the majority of the city council agrees with what they mean, or you might find yourselves in a pickle anyway, depending on the topic. But it may mean something different to each of you and then be less valuable of a strategic priority. So that would just be my concern if we were, but I think the conversation is helpful, as we develop a budget while not quite complete with strategic priorities. And also, I just think if I was a city council member, I would appreciate a broader discussion of that to understand what the implications might be or what the perceived implications might be for any of these strategic priorities.
Thank you for that. I just wanted to point out also, I really do like the inclusive growth management, housing access, and economic resilience pulled out into their separate bullets. I think we get closer to what Councilmember Keene has discussed, which is having a little bit more meat to the strategic priorities. So I'm very comfortable with those. And on the transformational capital projects, I wonder, Councilmember Keene, if you could maybe flesh that out a little bit more as to your thoughts on that, since you were the main champion of that.
Thank you. Yeah, what I'm talking about here is if you go back to the start of like Bold Forward, but also things like our bus rapid transit, 6th Street Bridge, there's a lot of things that we've done, spent a lot of work getting, and I, for lack of a better word, teed up for the next 2 or 3 years. And to me, if I want to make sure our strategic priorities include execution and doing those well, and not being distracted by this idea of like, what's another new thing we need to be worried about, which I think will come up, I think it will, but I think from a strategic priorities, I wanted to make sure that we're stating both within our own conversation and with our conversation with the staff and conversation with the community, that we are focused on completing what we set out to do versus someone else will do that. We're off to the next thing. And I want to, that was my thoughts going into that.
Thank you for that. Other thoughts?
I hear that as deliver on the dream.
Let's call it that.
Don't dream and then go, oh, that's not what we thought it was going to be. So I guess my other question would be if there's any like major heartburn with how these are ringing true or not with you, and if there isn't a desire to have a follow-up discussion that's just focused on I think focusing on, we have the short version and then after the colon, like what does after the colon mean to you? And if there's general agreement, if we can do that in another meeting, I think that would strengthen your ability to approve these, talk about them publicly and collectively share what they mean. Granted, there's always going to be individual nuances of projects that you really care about or policies that you really relate to one or all of these, but just having a collective understanding of what the intent is in a separate meeting, I think would be valuable to staff as well. And maybe we could bring back a few examples of action plan items that we think would fit in certain places that might help flesh out how staff would use it as well.
Councilmember Miller.
Just a final comment. One of the things that I think was part of affordable living was housing and transportation together. And maybe transportation is an inclusive growth management with infrastructure planning. But I would look hopefully for some definition of an action plan, which priorities those transportation access and quality falls within. And it's partly under transformational capital projects with BRT. But just in the planning, our comp plan so closely aligns land use and transportation planning. And I would love to see that flow down to our strategic priorities and action plans. And I think it's there.
I think it might be in multiple places. Yeah. As I'm just looking at the strategic priorities and then thinking, how will we matrix that? But
Okay, it sounds like we've got a few areas to focus on in a.
I'm hearing
future
we're going in the right
conversation.
direction.
Yes, and I think I'm hearing a little bit more fleshing out of what we may agree on responsible environmental stewardship, and then how the transportation fits into inclusive growth management. Is that fair? Sounds good. Let's.
And someone was taking notes, as well as the clerk. So we'll come up with something. Really appreciate it. This is helpful. We are at the beginning of the budget process, but we are in the budget process. So that's just maybe a good example of how to look at some of what is a more tactical look at finances and what we're sort of up against and opportunities that we have moving forward. So as you're thinking about the budget and the 2-year budget cycle, things to think about, not just today, but are there any areas of feedback you have where if you've heard something out in the community, you've learned something on it with colleagues that you've talked to, are you interested in things like service levels? Like, are we okay changing service levels? Typically, adjusting upward a service level has a cost to it, and adjusting downward a service level has a cost savings, but a sometimes political cost to it. Are there areas of priority where you really think we should invest? Some of that was our strategic priorities conversation. Are there areas that you think we should really look closely at because you don't feel confident that it's either as important to the community or being provided in a way that makes the most sense? Interested in shared services in any areas? Centralizing, we've done some of this over time, centralizing like services. What are the challenges you're hearing about and seeing? What opportunities do you think exist where we should be really focusing on investment? So just ways to think about the budget as a policy tool versus dollars and cents. It's all about the money, but it's not all about the money. The goal should be for us to be influencing the results for the community, much in alignment with what was discussed for the strategic priorities. And now I can't click, I think maybe because there we go. So again, there's a timeline to the budget. The budget never ends. This is the beauty of the budget. Even after you approve the budget, we're managing it throughout the year. It's one of the reasons why I love the budget, is because it is our ongoing policy document that says what are our constraints, what are our opportunities, and how do we keep moving forward in delivering on the community priorities. So your next stop after this discussion is going to be in June. You'll have a lot more detail. You will have the recommended capital improvement plan, which is a significant part of the budget, but a little bit easier to get your arms around because there is a finite project in there. And so the rest of the budget is a little more amorphous. We'll also have the results of the 2024 audit. So, we budget, what's the plan? And then the audit is what happened. Hopefully they're close to each other, but sometimes things happen. Then the recommended total budget book will come to you for some study sessions in August and September. Your meeting in September is where you set the preliminary levy. So that is the levy amount where you can't go up. You can only go the same or down from the levy that is established in September. And then hopefully we've gotten a lot of feedback between August, September, and sometimes there's still minor changes that need to happen for the budget, before the budget hearing and final budget adoption in December. But again, we're looking at baseline. What does it take to be the city? And I will go to the mayor if allowed. Any service modifications to the baseline and of course the capital improvement program, which can vacillate year to year. We have a $100 million project. Your budget changes a lot in that year. So
Mayor Norton?
Yeah, I'm sorry. And you don't have to move the slides, but 2 slides back, you had the 2 questions for us. When do you want the feedback on those 2 questions?
I would say it would be helpful to have it probably before the end of May. If you have, the sooner the better.
Okay.
If you're thinking about those things. Today would be great, but sometimes you don't think of those things until you have the details of the budget either. But if it's high level, something that you've been thinking about that we think the city should be investing in, or you've had questions about, it's just helpful to hear those things to understand how they may or may not actually show up in the budget. Sometimes there's not a budget implication to a question or a concern.
Councilmember Miller?
Just a couple of items feedback-wise. This goes back to our comp plan update. But as we talk about the cost of providing services and what the appropriate service levels are, I would love to see an update. The DMC engaged a consultant a few years ago to look at the property value per acre as far as where our property values and how the development pattern is contributing to our tax levy support. But I think a step beyond that is to look at the cost of services over that same area and understand the real cost of some of these, where how our comp plan integrates transportation planning, see the financial impact of that. And then another area I would love to see a little bit more fleshed out from a policy perspective is the travel demand management programming, transportation planning that integrates our land use and comp plan goals. Because I think with our active transportation position now opening up, that would be the last transportation planner on staff at the city of Rochester. And obviously that's a coordination with ROCOG, but I think with those being so tightly key to our comp plan, would love to see how we're integrating those goals and staff time.
I'll just offer this, the first part of that, maybe a little bit of the second part too, might be something that we need to do over the 2 years in order to structurally adjusting our budget and showing the relationships of capital investment that are necessary for private growth to happen, and whether that private growth is, I guess, paying for itself or not, right? Depends on the type of economics you use. It just might take a little bit longer than developing this, but it's something that we can consider in the process and how we could look at it. Sorry, so much excitement about the budget. I thought maybe there was a question. So this is really just to ground you in the budget that we're in. So we are in 2025. Currently, inclusive of Rochester Public Utilities, the total budget is just shy of $720 million. Again, we're buying power with that. We're delivering a lot of different services over almost 57 square miles. So it may seem really large, but the vast majority of that you can see about half of it is operations. So the day-to-day getting the work done. And then a lot of it is the capital improvement program. So if you think about the project at the wastewater reclamation plant, that's almost $100 million project. So very quickly, those things add up when we're talking about the capital improvement program. And then actually a very small amount of the budget is debt service, so less than $33 million. If you look at the operating revenue, we like to focus a lot on the ad valorem taxes, which is your property tax levy, but it is less than 16% of that total budget. So the lion's share of the budget is actually charges for service. So when you think about utilities and rates, it's fairly significant amount of charge for service in parks and recreation as well. You're getting a large amount of that total budget paid for through rates and other charges that are not the tax levy. If you look at the chart and go to intergovernmental revenue, we get a lot of intergovernmental revenue. So if you think about the transit system, federal and state aid, there's no tax levy going to that. There was a very short period of time where we put a little bit of tax levy for the structures that were updated for accessible pads and bus shelters, very small amount, but we do not have tax levy going there. If you think about the airport and the revenue that's coming from the airport, if you think about, we do still get local government aid, things of that nature. We do rely pretty significantly on revenue from other governmental sources. Even the conversation that we've been having about the fire service area and the township revenue, that's intergovernmental revenue. So when you look to other taxes, you're at about 1%. Other taxes is actually primarily your lodging tax. So that's been pretty much committed to the Civic Center and its future capital, its operation and future capital investment, as well as you have debt service that's being paid for from lodging tax. And then licenses and permits, even though we talk about pulled forward unbound a lot, it's not a huge part of the permit fees. Obviously, there's also some of that in the charges for service. But again, we talk a lot about the levy, but when we really think about that $720 million, it's not a huge part of what's making all of these services work. It's important, of course, but you do have a lot of other revenues that are coming in. So just another way of looking at it, the general fund, we talk about a lot. The general fund includes public works, fire, police, significant personnel-driven parts of the organization. So when the general fund, when you look at that, we are more reliant on the tax levy in the general fund because we don't charge to send a police officer to your house. It's just an expectation, sort of like having insurance. If you look at the property tax of 111, a little over about $111 million for 2025. You can see how it breaks out. Very much the general fund is reliant on the property tax. Again, that's where police, fire, public works are. Parks and recreation, fairly reliant on the tax levy as well as the library. The capital improvement projects, about $9 million a year, and then some debt service and a little bit goes to the airport for its operation. If you think about a median value home, $288,000, it's probably increased a little bit in the last year. About $1,325 a year in city property taxes. You can see how that breaks out in your tax bill. So a large amount of that is going towards public safety, but it's a large part of our budget. So not surprising that if you were to break it out this way, the way that your tax bill is getting used is public safety, general government, public works, municipal recreation, and then it goes down the line. So another way of looking at that, because why have a pie chart without a bar chart, is to think about the total budget for police. There is other revenue that's coming in, but a significant amount of that really is relying on the tax levy, as well as fire, public works, again, the municipal recreation system, and the library. So we like to show this slide. It does not mean that we are 200% under on our FTE count. Obviously, a lot has changed since 1980. I wouldn't have this clicker in 1980. I probably wouldn't have a PowerPoint in 1980. Someone from IBM might have helped me with a PowerPoint in 1980. But I mean, a lot has changed, right? We have different ways of providing service. If you look at the far right bar chart, that's actually the number of hydrants and the percent increase we've had in fire hydrants. But we also have things like geographic information systems now. So we don't have to have a set of paper plans to know where fire hydrants are. We can take something out and plot it quickly and access that data. But we haven't grown our staff. We try always and have been for many, many years to understand that we can't just increase our costs. We have to think about how we're providing service, which could be a contract, could be staff, or it could be new technology, investing in that. So with that, I will turn it over to Aaron Parrish, and he will talk a little bit about some of the major economic indicators that we have coming up.
Before you leave, could I ask one quick question?
Go ahead, Mayor.
Thank you. Usually when we see those pie charts, we have one just for the full general budget that says how much is public safety. This time we only are seeing the tax levy. We always talk about the percent of the full budget being, I don't know if it was 62% or 57%. Yeah.
I don't know if we typically put it as a percentage of the total budget, but I want to say
Used to.
Okay, police is about $30 million. So 30 million of 720 million of the total budget. We typically show it,
Just of the, general
Usually
fund budget.
have it in like as a dollar bill.
Yeah,
and-
yeah, I was,
Well, we just didn't have that for this particular presentation.
okay, and if we could follow up with that at some point, just because it's easy to talk about property taxes, but it's also good to talk about taxes as a whole. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, absolutely, and we'll update it in August when you receive the recommended budget. So I get to bring you some good news and bad news this afternoon. So from an economic perspective, there's a lot of great indicators out there, and when we try to ground you in the budget, we want you to do it, within the context of what's happening out, in the community and in the country. Overall, as you all know, Rochester has very low and virtually, almost no unemployment at 2%. Now, that doesn't mean there's not people not actively in the workforce, not, getting picked up in that. But by state standards and national standards, we're hovering just over 2% unemployment. It's very low. Some economists would say that's full employment. So that's very good for us, although it means, some of our employers can have challenges recruiting and retaining folks. On behalf of the community development team, they very much were glad to deliver you the highest valuation of building permits that they've ever recorded last year. And so just under $700 million in 2024. It's a record year. That's the good news. The bad news is part of that is based on a building permit is based on how much it costs you to build things, and it's getting more expensive to build things. So a little bit of that inflation is built in here, but nonetheless, a very significant valuation for last year. So overall, that's good.
Can I
Building
ask you,
permit? Yeah, sure.
before you go to the next slide, Administrator Zelms mentioned the Bolt Forward program in relation to licenses and permits. Are we expected to see that in 2025 go up, both from a percentage standpoint and the number of permits?
We are projecting, so I would say
Because
the
of
vast
that
majority of this 700,000 did not relate to Bolt Forward
Yeah.
Unbound. Most of those permits have yet to come through. We are segregating both regular, conventional, traditional building permits and then those that are associated with Bolt Forward Unbound because we have some staffing. But we'll get you the breakout of those as we move forward.
Got it.
But this is strictly just generally stuff that hit the general fund in a positive way last year for the most part. So
Thank you.
you'll see that positive outcome when you see your audit in June as well. Again, lodging tax, this is a great story. Lodging tax, pandemic, very pandemic impacted. We were just down in that era at about $6 million. We're coming up now just under $11 million in that very short period of time. So we did crash a little bit around the pandemic, but lodging tax has been going up. Room occupancy is holding and growing, as well as your daily rate for your rooms is also getting
Can you hold
higher.
it for a minute? Councilmember,
Can you remind us what the 2019 tax might have been and how we compare? It's a little bit higher.
Yeah, off the top of my head, I don't know the exact number. Certainly happy to grab that and show you just to give you a sense of what the dip might have been there. But yeah, off the top of my head, I do
I
not know.
believe it was closer to the 2022 number.
Okay, closer to 22, it sounds like. So we'll definitely get that. And we do a 5-year forecast for lodging tax, also looking promising in the 5-year forecast. Again, lots can happen in that space, but we do that. Lodging tax covers a couple things for us. One is our civic center operations. Just around $4 million of lodging tax is allocated to civic center operations. And then we also have debt on the civic center facility, which you're seeing a refunding of that come through because we are ahead in collections on that. So that's positive as well.
Councilmember Miller.
Just to pull it up, I pulled up the past meeting from 2023. In 2018, it was 10.5 million. 2019, it was 10.4.
Okay, thank you. All right, sales tax. Another, good indicator here. Also did not have the 2019 information if that question does come up. So if someone wants to grab that, that'd be great. But I will say if I recall, it's closer to the 2020 data or maybe just a little bit closer to the 21 data. When we went in to do we started in 2020 working on the renewal for the sales tax that obviously the 4 projects are now being funded out of. When we went to the legislature with that, we projected those numbers off of $13 million as our projected collections. Going into next year, or this year rather, in '24, we were just under 16 million. So we've seen good growth in collections. Again, things are costing people more. That means they're paying more tax on it. But at the same time, we're also seeing good economic activity in the community as well.
Councilmember Wall.
With inflation being as it has been, why would 24 be a little less than 23? Do you have any ideas?
Yeah, I mean, in the scheme of the revenue source, it's relatively consistent at just a couple $100,000 different. So I don't know if there's one variable in there that would have attributed that. Inflation, really did sort of hit in that 23, 24 timeframe. So yeah, I can't put a pin on that. It might be people just spending a little bit less, just thinking about what's going on in the economy and maybe just pulling back a little bit. But a couple $100,000 variation, it's really hard to pin that down.
It's not so much the almost stable, but the other years showed significant growth. 800,000, more than 1 million, another more than 1 million.
Yeah.
And we had a little bit of a retrenchment.
Yeah, or maybe hitting equilibrium. I think you had a point, you also are coming out of a pandemic here. Again, the economy was doing quite well those couple of years prior where you saw that growth, and there's more apprehension out there at this point in time. So I think that if I had to prognosticate, I'd probably put it in that space, but overall, we're in pretty good shape here. We were projecting 13 million for collections, and we're, getting up to 16 million here. So, moving on, more good news. We did see growth in our property tax valuation, 1.77. So you'll see when we come back in June, you'll be requested to increase your levy by some amount. However, it won't, if it's, just say this for a number, if it's a 5% increase, it might not feel like a 5% increase to the taxpayer because we had new growth and new construction to spread that property tax over to a larger body of folks. So just realize new construction is a good thing. It helps buffer and mitigate the property tax increase. The other thing, the valuation adjustment of 4.81%, that means the existing properties in Rochester grew in value. So you saw that at 4.81. People take that a little bit differently. A lot of times your property taxpayer will say, well, my dollar amount changed and with their valuation went up. That doesn't resonate as much with them. They just want to understand what their total dollar investment is for property taxes. I will say one thing to note, that property tax is a complicated system. We have seen the last couple of years, the last couple of cycles, a shift from the commercial base to the residential base. So commercial, valuations either staying the same or going down. And then the residential valuations going up quite a bit more. And as you may have saw recently, the county is seeing some higher commercial valuations. We don't have that data yet, but we will look for that and we may see a bit of a shift back to commercial. So that's one thing we'll also bring you in August, is a better understanding of what kind of shifting is happening between commercial, residential, and multifamily housing. Our good friend Jim Miner, on behalf of the Southeast Minnesota Realtors, gives us great data on housing. And so you can just see your average sold price relatively flat in 23 and 24. I wouldn't put too much stock into 25. That's really 1 month's worth of data, and that can change over the cycle of a year. But you are seeing a little bit of stabilization of those property tax or those housing sales. Same kind of space in the median. So we have average and median in the last couple of years. Although you can see over the last 10 years a fairly steep curve of appreciation in a average single family home in Rochester. This is one, if you have not received a lot of feedback on it yet, you will at some point. This is our general property tax levy increase. We try to bring you a forecast for that. So our finance team does a 5-year forecast. That'll be updated as part of the August presentation to you all. It tries to give you a sense of the decisions you're making budget-wise, what they forecast out to be in the outer years. I'll just say, like, you can see, we go back to 2014 here. We have a couple of 0% levy increase years that are followed by very significant spikes up. So those 0% years, it does take us time to recover from those. And, you know, then eventually we sort of, you know, get back to equilibrium. So we had a 0% year in 14. We in essence had a 0% year in 2021. That 2.51% in that area is related to the park levy that was approved. So we had a 0% operating increase that year. That 2.5 is parks. Now you'll probably gravitating right to that 2026 number. Based on our,
Councilmember Wall.
Well, he's getting to it.
Oh, okay.
I'll make comment after this.
okay. That 2026 number that Councilmember Wall's been looking at since we started talking here is 10.68%. So again, based on our labor contracts, based on known increases and cost escalations, based on our revenue mixes, and we're going to talk more about our revenues in a moment. That's that. Now, I will say, I know the team has been working very hard, and Allison's going to cover this, about what are some strategies we can implement to get less than 10.68%. So I know that's definitely, you know, we've heard that conversation with the council. We understand that has an impact. We understand the local ecosystem there. And so we'll be, even later in this presentation, discussing some things, but even more so as we get into August, bringing you some ideas about how we can do something different than 10.68. And that's what we're here to receive feedback on tonight as well. You can see after 10.68, it does start to go down a little bit. I will in the next slide show you how we have been relying on some one-time federal money to buy down our property tax levies over this period of time to recover from that 0% levy. We're weaning off of that, but I'm very anxious to hear Councilmember Wall's
Yeah, I was
question.
going to say, did he correctly anticipate your question?
Yes, and I guess my question has turned into more commendation. The 9.44%, when we first saw this a year ago, was over 10%. The next year at 9.96 was well over 11%, getting close to 12%. So somehow staff has worked to bring that forecast down over 2% or about 2%. So my hope would be that we can work on that other peak and somehow make this even more palatable to the council and the community. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Mayor Norton.
And just, we do this all the time, and I point it out all the time, and I think we need to continue to point it out all the time, that it's not a 10% property tax increase. It's just an increase in the whole levy amount that gets apportioned out, and it affects all of our taxes differently. We just need to keep saying that because it gets misunderstood.
Councilmember Doring.
Just out of curiosity, when projections happen for that 5-year span, what are you talking about in terms of levy increase for additional services? Or is it just making an assumption that the level of service that the city is providing is static?
That's a great question. I would say we generally are projecting out what the current level of services are and what it would take to sustain and maintain those. However, there is some buffering put into the forecast to account for things you don't know, or some moderate level of new investment that you might want to consider.
Okay.
Councilmember Miller.
Just a quick question. Many of us are new to the council this year, and the curiosity about prior year numbers pre-2020 had me open the slideshow from 2023. And could you talk about the primary factors between what was projected in 2023 for the 2024 budget increase of 5.9% versus the actual of 9.44?
I'm trying to understand your question. So go.
Councilmember Miller, Council President, I would say the largest was the settling of the labor contract for the law enforcement labor services, and a market adjustment, that a $5 an hour market adjustment. That was a significant increase that we hadn't anticipated going into that. But on the flip side of that, you saw that we were somewhat muted coming out of COVID and during, and we actually had during a time where we were at like a 2% year-over-year adjustment for all of our contracts. There were cities giving people canoes, $10 an hour market adjustments for police, things like that. So I mean, we were muted during a time where there was a lot of investment going towards that. So that's one example of something pretty significant that changed.
Okay, thank you. Because, yeah, looking at the 2023 presentation, the levy projected increase is fairly flat, around 6%. And this projection a couple of years later is just different. So I appreciate the context.
The other piece of context that works into those, we'll call it the 2020 to 2020, even now, 26 timeframe, is we received one-time federal funding that we in essence have been programming to buy down the levy. We started off in 23 using 2.3 million of that funding. And that year, if you would have taken in 23, you know, that particular year at 6.85, had we not had that funding, that would have been about an 8.85. So you just think about that as we kind of march through, and then we've been kind of stepping our way down out of it. But it's not insignificant. There's a fair amount of, you know, buffering that we did with that one-time federal funding. Okay.
Councilmember Keen.
Yeah, I guess I will ask here, just because of the timing of it. I want to make sure I understand that, because I know about that idea of the buying down, but I thought we specifically targeted that at places that were mostly hit by COVID, like parking, like things that were going to come back, so that we wouldn't create this sort of vacuum where now we had to come up with bigger levy increases to make up for the holistic budget stability funds.
So Councilmember Keen, these are the amounts that we've appropriated every year for a holistic budget stability amount. We did receive a significantly higher, a significantly higher amount of CARES and ARPA funding that we eventually, you know, put into parking programs and other economic incentives for local businesses. But this approximately $7 million was specifically appropriated to buy down the levy.
And let's make sure we know when you say buy down the levy, that's funding that was going into the general fund, that it had to be made up in the out years through levy spending.
That's correct. So as we stepped down in 23 from 2.3 to 1.4, you know, you had to come up with a 1% increase in the levy approximately. So you can think about it that way too.
Councilmember Fredericks.
Thank you. Mayor Norton's correct. The public perception of a tax levy is that it translates right to their property taxes. So I'm glad she clarified that. But for clarification, what equates from, let's say, our proposal this here is 9.96. What is the percentage that drops down to the residential household owners and the business owners? What is the percentage that the drop down is?
So it really can vary from neighborhood to neighborhood. And so I'll give you last year as an example. And what we'll do for you in August is we'll give you the projected tax impact on an average value home. So we'll say this is the impact of the average value home in 25. This is what it's projected to be in 26. So you can understand whatever levy increase you ultimately land on, you know, that's going to be the impact of the average value taxpayer. Now you have to kind of keep it up there, because last year we also saw, you know, in the neighborhoods with houses from, you know, we'll say 200 to 400, you know, they had significantly higher valuation increases and appreciation than neighborhoods from 400 to 700. So, you know, I'm just going to make this up, but like in the higher end, you know, home might have seen 5%, and the 200, you know, that mid-price home from 2 to 400 might have seen, you know, something like, you know, 10%. So the valuation adjustments within the community are not always consistent. So we always just try to put it in the context of that average value home.
That would coincide then, though. If you're saying 10% for an average value home, we had a levy increase of 9.44.
Yeah, I was using that as an example. I'll give you a couple examples from last year. So last year, or this year rather, last year's budget, the one we're living in now, 9.96. You know, in that case, we saw a lot of people come out of that much less than 9.96. So we saw quite a few folks in that 4% range.
That's what I'm trying to get to is, you know, what is the real number?
Yeah.
You know, okay, so your taxes were $3,500 this year. They went up, you know, is it 1%? Is it 5? What is the number? You know, 'cause that question does get asked a lot.
So Council President, I think the challenge is there's no 1%. So what happens is if you have all of the property within the city, the valuation is the big pie, right?
Yep.
You have a slice of pie that's commercial. And what was alluded to earlier is if the commercial slice of the pie is growing because their valuation is getting bigger, it's automatically going to absorb more of any increase to the levy.
I'm very familiar.
Even a flat levy, it would absorb more of the existing amount, right? So let's say during that 0% levy year,
Budget ads, all that stuff. And I think
and
most
the
people do.
problem is it's very different on every single tax bill. We can't say it's 10% because it depends on your valuation of your property and the
Sure.
valuation. There are years where people's tax bills goes down when we do an increase to the levy because their valuation doesn't adjust and their neighbors adjust, so they will automatically be absorbing less of the total levy. So it could be -5% to plus 15 or 20%, depending on the category of tax that you're in, how that category changed, how much that category was absorbing of the total tax, and how the multiple categories of taxation shifted like from each other. So it's a complex math problem.
I'm going to go to Mayor Norton because I believe that she has spoken to a lot of constituents and tried to explain this. So go ahead.
I'll just say, this is one of the most difficult things we do, and we pressure the staff every year to give us the number. And the truth of the matter is the county does their assessments, and we don't get those until November-ish. And so we have to make our decisions and then wait till the assessments are done and released to find out how it's going to, we don't even know really, it's guesswork at this point based on last year's numbers. And it is different for every single house. And to the point, there are years where people come in and say, I had a 45% increase. And on occasion, and I fear a little bit, that's what's going to happen with commercial property this year because there were multiple years where they did not assess the commercial properties, that they're going to feel it more this year than they have for the past several years because the county does assessments. They do, I think it's ag, commercial, and residential, thank you. And they do it on a cycle. And so they missed a cycle, and I don't remember the rationale. There was a reason they couldn't do commercial, and it's a year late. So I think commercial is going to feel the brunt of it this year, which is a little scary. But just know, council member, every year from now until November, you will hear us pushing because we want to know how it's going to impact our constituents, and they can't tell us anything until after that the evaluations come out, or the whatever, in November. So, and I also want to just say one other thing, just for perspective, historic perspective, regarding the ARPA funding. We were thrilled to have gotten some money from the federal government directly to the city of Rochester. The county got a lot more than we did. We got some, but I just want to put this in perspective for you. The city of Rochester got $18 million. The city of Duluth got $65 million with less population. The formula was not just population-based. It's a very squirrely formula, but Minneapolis and St. Paul got, I don't know, $100 million. We got only $18 million, and we worked hard to keep some of it available to try to help modify this tax increase, but it was nothing compared to what other communities had. And I just want you to know that the staff worked really hard with that 18 million to make it go as far as they could. And I guess I want to be clear, we're grateful for that 18 million, but it was nothing compared to Duluth, Minneapolis, and St. Paul.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Parrish, go. Continue.
Yeah, so we'll do our best to give you some great examples in August and give you the average value tax increases, let you understand what's going on with the base and understand that. You'll also be you'll have the opportunity to have your property tax statements shared with the community. So that's another way people look at the percent increases. So that's something to be prepared for. And then additional impacts, other things that are kind of rolling around with the budget. Bulford Unbound and other infrastructure costs. I mean, clearly, there's an active conversation with that, particularly in the DMC space, and a number of things happening there. So I know the team's got a lot happening in that space. State funding. I mean, we, as the mayor pointed out, we are not favorably treated by many of the formulas, despite I think what we have is a good story and good need. So we're not maybe as susceptible to some of these challenges, but there is real impact coming from some of the state policy issues that are out there. State's budget isn't doing great. As you all know, there's a lot of robust conversation happening out there. The governor's budget currently includes reductions in Greater Minnesota Transit funding. We don't know that that will necessarily impact us year one, but it may impact us in the future. So we have to be aware of that. There's kind of a sort of a sleeper item here that we receive reimbursement for duty-related disability health insurance for our public safety employees that retire due to a duty-related disability. We continue to pay the expense for their health care to age 65. We are currently getting 100% reimbursement based on some one-time funding that the legislature appropriated a few years ago. That's projected to run out in 27. So what we are getting for reimbursement at 530 will probably go down to like 45, which is our historical level at about 8.5% funding there. So just realize that one-time funding at the state is going away, so our obligation will resume in that space. Oops. There we go. Local government aid, a lot of conversation that happens there. Just to say our numbers have been going down over the years, so we probably could expect that. It went slightly up in 23, from 23 to 24 and 25. Depending on how the state budget reconciles this year, we could hold or we could go down. So we haven't seen any projections based on the House or Senate budgets yet. The tax bills have not been released, but we're kind of anxiously awaiting that to understand what our local government aid situation might be. But $5 million, it's not insignificant for us as a revenue source, and there is a potential that that could go down.
I'll just continue the mayor's thoughts on unfairness to Rochester when it comes to local government aid, not only Duluth, but Mankato, Austin, and we can name many cities that get a lot more than we do. So, and I know that this may not be the year to see any change from the legislature, but I know our team is continuing to tell the Rochester story that a city of 125,000 people, we do have needs here, so.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Of course, federal issues, right? So there's a couple of things happening at the federal level that are impactful to us. I would say, we categorize all of our city grants, and we have at least 55 federal grants that are federally focused. So there's a range of impacts. Some of the grants are operational. So you think about community development block grants, something we historically get, also in the category of things we get a lot less of than most. Various law enforcement funding, those things are things we sort of get year to year. They support operations to a certain extent. We'll monitor those and determine, if those are continue. We have a number of projects that are awarded and drawing funds. So you think about like the airport runway project at over $90 million. You think about BRT at $85 million of federal funding. Like those are significant projects that are in flight. We're monitoring to make sure that, we continue to be able to receive funding and reimbursement in those categories. And then we have a number of projects where, there's a lot of public attention paid to them and they're awarded, but we might not have a grant agreement on that. So like 6th Street Bridge is a great example of that. You're not allowed or able to get a grant agreement until you're within 6 months of construction. And we're not quite to that point yet. Or the 4th Street Roundabout, which was a congressionally directed spending allocation for us. We are, not able to, draw down funds in that space yet. So we're trying to determine, are we going to be able to move forward with these projects? In some cases, we've got significant design costs in those areas. They're a little easier to manage because they're like project specific capital money. But at the same time, you look at like the North Broadway Park and Ride is kind of a favorite project of mine. A lot of people don't think about it, but like it's $12 million. It's out at the rec center. You might have got a call at one point or another about parking issues out at the rec center. And it's going to be great for transit and great for that particular site. And, we don't have a grant agreement yet. So we're just trying to make sure that we can move forward on these projects. I'll say our local representative has been really great for us when we reach out with questions or if we're experiencing a difficulty, which we've had on a few things. They've done an amazing job of being responsive. to, help us troubleshoot issues that we might have. So a handful of these projects are there, and just you want to be aware of, and this is just a more visual version of the previous slide, just highlighting some of those significant federal projects and collaborations that we have ongoing. Somehow I got to be the person to deliver you the news that your wage increase is not budgeted for. That is something that you have to tell us to do by motion. So that's the guidance that we have in this space, as well as just letting you know your travel budget, previous year was set at 15,000 and, it's proportionally allocated. And so just letting you know that landscape, but I think Councilmember Doring.
Councilmember Doring.
Yeah, not to interrupt or go back to a previous question. So with federal funding dollars, are we paying attention to whether those dollars come to us with now restrictions on them or conditions on them, like removal of DI programming or anything like that we hear in the media? And if so, will those come to us before as a council decision before we accept those funds?
Yes. Thank you for bringing that up. I meant to address that and I did not. I was excited to get to your salary news there. Yeah, I mean, it's a fair question. We're in a situation where, we want to get the federal funding and we have to want to get it with the requirements that come along with it. We've been given some indications, and when these things come through with grant agreements, you'll often approve those. You'll understand what the terms are. But there's some broader guidance that's happening out there. I don't know that there's been anything specifically that we have not been able to meet at this point in time, but I think as the issues come up, we would engage, right? So if it is something related to immigration enforcement, or if it's something related to, the way we altering practices, which I believe we're consistent and compliant in that space. But these are all things that, might be asked of us, and we either have to be prepared to answer, and then you have to be ultimately comfortable with the policy direction, so. I don't know. Michael or Allison, did I hit that correctly?
You did. Nailed it.
All right.
You can go back to talking about our wages if you want to. I mean, sorry about that.
So I think I said enough on the wages. Just if you wanted to adjust or talk about that, that just takes a motion of the council. And then we would reflect that in the budget, but we just don't autopilot that. That's a council decision that you all make there. And then of course, not to be outdone on any of these other things, there's just a handful of broader economic issues, tariffs. Kind of a quiet sleeper issue is the elimination of the tax exemption on municipal bonds. So if you think about a few of the bond issuances we brought forward to you, and we're actually working on the regional sports and rec complex issuance now, just to get ahead of the potential challenge if the bond exemption were to go away. So just know that we try to monitor those things, but it can impact construction. It can impact any number of different things.
I'm not gonna go back to the wage part, but in the first paragraph, I did want to ask a question on the travel and training funds. So they're currently budgeted for 2025 at 15K. Were they initially budgeted at around 30K, and then that was one of the kind of pieces that the council last year?
Yeah, your 24
Removed.
budget was about 30, and then your 25 budget through your action was changed to 15.
Okay, from my perspective would be, I would like to see that go back to its initial fund. And like I said, I'm not going anywhere near the salary issue, but I think the public has to understand that as council members, we do not have a lot of, if any, dedicated funds to us. And so the ability to do learnings and trainings and also represent our city at whether it's the League of Minnesota Cities or other national events, I think is a valuable place for us to learn, to do our jobs as best we can, and to represent our city. Mayor Norton.
Well, I have three thoughts, three things. One, I agree that we need to have enough of a travel budget so that folks can be represented at League of Minnesota Cities and the National League of Cities. They're beneficial. We have 4 new members who can learn a lot at these conferences on particular issues, whether it be transportation or housing or what have you, right? Public safety, there's a lot of information to be gained. So I would love to see that addressed. And I'll just say, you know, you may not want to talk about your own salaries, but I do want to talk about your salaries. What happened before happened because people got afraid to put a cost of living increase in the annual increase. And when you don't do that, and then 10 years rolls around, suddenly you are completely out of whack with what other cities of your size are doing or what's reasonable for someone to think they could do to do the job. So I guess I would, you know, I'm not going to put an amount out there, but I do think putting in at least a cost of living increase is reasonable. Or if you've done bargaining and there's a particular percent that you've done for your bargaining, an average or something among other city employees. I mean, we are not city employees, but that's a number to look at as well. But I think at least a couple percent increase based on cost of living is reasonable. And the third point I want to make has to do with what you just heard about the tax exempt municipal bonds. That is an issue that when we were in Washington, D.C. with National League of Cities, we did talk to our our congressional representatives that represent the state of Minnesota and others. And this is a huge issue nationwide. So every city is concerned, probably counties as well, are very concerned about that particular issue. And it is my hope that wiser heads will prevail and they won't touch those. But just know it is an issue that we've been involved in and we should continue to be involved in.
And just maybe extending the mayor's comments, I would note the county, this budget year, did move toward indexing their salaries as well. So just, that's certainly another, you know, benchmark out in the world for that.
Councilmember Miller.
Is that perhaps a topic that would be worthwhile for a future study session to look at how other cities are looking at their long-term projections for best practices in that space?
Yeah, or we could roll it into the August budget presentation, just give you some context and.
If there's council concurrence, we can do
Sure.
that, but that's a.
Yeah, and I'm looking
in
at my
every other
colleagues.
city, it's all over the place how they do that.
Okay.
But I'll just say, this city council has a much larger stipend than most city councils. So I don't know that that would be incredibly helpful depending on what you're looking at.
Okay. Well, I mean, to Mr. Parrish's point, I was thinking about the county as well in this past year, indexing or doing a study at least of peer counties.
Or just options for indexing. Like, I think that's the more normal, you know,
Would
thing
it-
is to.
I would agree with Councilmember Miller. I mean, I'm not afraid of my salary. I think, and I think everybody here works very hard for what we make. And as anybody, you know, you're doing a job and you should be proud of what you do and you should get increases. So I don't have a problem with discussing it and being transparent about how the council members' salaries have been frozen at, what is it, 2020 numbers, and that we can look at it, compare it, and then make our decisions. Councilmember Keen.
And just a clarification, you can use indexing and have that as your model, but the council or the charter says you must vote each year if the salaries change. So you can't just put it on automatic and get increases. That's just so we understand what we mean by indexing. You can have that, but you still have to have that individual discussion each year.
Thank you.
And vote.
So we did talk about it.
Thank you.
Moving on to credit card fees. Did we cover
People
that
love
one?
credit card fees, and we pay about $500,000 a year of those. And so I think just something at the staff level we're evaluating. Obviously, people expect to be able to pay that way. We don't currently charge for that particular service. If you go to, you know, certain governmental entities, you often pay a charge for the use of your card. So it's a bit of a policy question on whether you want to build the convenience into your fee structures or whether you want to, you know, charge for that particular service. I would say this is also a fairly significant issue for RPU. And so there's kind of a concurrent evaluation that we'll try to do in this space. Other funds, equipment revolving, so you don't normally see like, hey, we're buying a new, plow truck or police car or fire truck. We have a depreciation or a sinking kind of fund that's set up for equipment revolving. Departments are charged depreciation after the purchase price within the operating budgets. I would just say the fund is challenged. We're seeing at times if you have a vehicle that was supposed to depreciate over 7 years, that it could be twice as expensive to replace it than what we might have depreciated it at. So we're looking at options for that fund health, but just know that there's pressure in that space. Similarly, we've seen some trends in the work comp space. We're self-insured for work comp, so we monitor what we're paying out, what we're taking in, and how we're allocating that to departments. Likewise with property insurance. We just, for the first time in the last 7 years, had all of our buildings actually evaluated for replacement cost. And so this year there'll be a fairly substantial increase in property tax or property insurance premiums rather. Good news is, in the night of a tornado watch, that we have better coverage. But and the bad news is it's going to cost us a little bit more. So it was good to go through that reconciliation, but we, obviously have to pay for that. Airport fund, as you know, the general fund, we contribute about $500,000 to the airport. In the past, we'll call it the pre-pandemic point of time. Our revenues over expenditures in the airport would have been like $1.1 million. You might have seen like some pictures with checks to the city for $1.1 million for the airport. Big deal was made out of that. They have been significantly funding operations, or they've been receiving significant support for operations through a federal program designed to help airports coming out of the pandemic. Those dollars are going away. We're now expecting that revenue over expenditures to be more in the $300,000 range. So if you think about, less margin in the airport unless we get new service. So I think it's, again, as you think about how to be innovative at the airport, how to encourage service, how to encourage utilization, how to travel through RST. These are all important things as we get the airport recalibrated. Any questions there before I move on to facilities? Okay. So facilities, you're going to see a much more significant presentation on this in June. So I will not go through this, chapter and verse by any means, but like our road systems, and I think Councilmember Miller was sort of talking about what does it really cost to maintain what you have, and how do you, maintain that, and what does your growth pattern do to that? For us, we have a fairly significant facility footprint. We have over 1.6 million just kind of in this little bucket. Now, this doesn't include everything either. This doesn't have like Soldiers Field, Clubhouse, or the park shelter, or any number of different things there. But our core city facilities, it's a significant asset. We had a facility condition assessment done. Up until a few years ago, we had no dedicated funding for facilities. It was really done on an emergent basis, one-time programming. We didn't really even have a facilities function to speak of. It was sort of decentralized to departments. That facility condition index is identifying about $120 million of deferred maintenance within our buildings. And as you can see, there's a number of things highlighted here. The Civic Center being our largest, facility at 600,000 square feet and just under $40 million of deferred maintenance within that building. Each one of these has a different story about how it was funded and how you would fund replacement in the future. This doesn't really include our enterprise facilities either. So just kind of as note, most of these are impacting the tax levy or some other kind of general revenue to speak of. So this just really highlights the significant need, where some of the hot spots are. I actually think and this might be a little more complicated, but this slide I think does a good job of just showing you, if I had to replace, or we have $20 million of roofs coming due in the next 10 years. So we have a little bit of a roof challenge at the rec center recently, a roof challenge at the Civic Theater. These are like coming up as they leak. Like we want to kind of get ahead of that. And so, $20 million, is what we project our roof need to be. If you look at the HVAC line item, you start to look at like $26 million of HVAC, stuff that isn't meant to last 30, 40 years. It's really 10, 15-year kinds of life cycles, 20-year life cycles on those items. So you just think about those needs in the context of right now we budget about $1 million a year for facility renewal. This obligation here over 10 years is 110, so think of, 10, 11, $12 million a year of need there. We clearly aren't going to be able to close that gap in this 10-year period of time, but we also want you to know, you have a bit of a fiscal cliff you're looking at here, and just trying to kind of, get you onboarded into the idea that we need to be thinking about our city buildings. And then we'll be talking more about that in June. So with that, I will flip it back to Allison to talk to you about the budget.
I have a quick question. I was trying to get Council
ahead.
President Shoebrings. In that facility numbers, where are parking lots located? Not like parking structure, but building parking lots. Is that earthwork and site work?
Site work and earthwork,
Okay.
that first
Okay.
line, yeah.
We were planning on gravel, no?
No.
Just to take this home, so the baseline budget we talked about a little bit. We have some notable items that come forward. You'll talk a little bit more about that as we move. The cost of labor is rarely ever flat. And so we are a labor-focused organization. We're a service organization, requires employees in order to do that. And we work in a labor environment where the Minnesota rules regarding bargaining affects almost every employee in the city with 20 bargaining units. So looking at sort of where things have been, the baseline carries a 4% adjustment for 2026 and 3% for 2027. That's the cost of living adjustment. There's other things associated with the labor contracts, like the market adjustment that was mentioned. There's not always a market adjustment, but sometimes there might be. So if you also look at this, we are starting to see some costs coming to us with the paid family medical leave program that was put in place with the state of Minnesota. So there are some longer term implications to this, but essentially the employer puts in 0.44%, as does the employee. The bigger unknowns and challenges are how often this will get used. It reloads every single year. And so depending on if we have to backfill someone who's out with paid family medical leave, there's the other cost of overtime or something of that nature that we will need to address over, I shouldn't say overtime, but I'm going to. The health insurance costs that are referenced there, 8% and 1.5% for dental, actually fairly muted compared to some markets. And then one thing that we are building into the budget this year is labor allocation. So if you think of an entity like, I'll just use Rochester Public Utilities because it's the largest one, they don't have their own HR department. So if you think of overhead, we've never charged for that. We do have the payment in lieu of tax for our major enterprise funds, but we're looking at a reasonable cost allocation so that the rates pay for some of the overhead that's necessary in order to have a wastewater operation, Rochester Public Utilities, et cetera. So it kind of gets into a little bit of that shared services because otherwise you're duplicating the costs within a fund if they are doing that directly for themselves. So it's a minor adjustment, but it's structural.
Can you talk a little bit more about the economies of shared services and what you've been doing with the city and some of this, especially the charter commissions like RPU and parks and libraries?
Sure, and of course, each of those entities has very specific services that they're experts in, like trees and parks and electricity and water. But there are other things like HR services where HR would be sort of the expert in that. And so, I mean, it's probably the easiest example. So we've always provided HR services across the entire organization. But we've also been looking at that for things like facilities. That was mentioned by Aaron Parrish, Deputy Administrator Parrish. And then different things like communications, having separate communications people embedded within each department because they need to have specific knowledge of that. We have service experts that can inform communications so that our story citywide is clear. We are City of Rochester, we have specific services that we provide rather than replicating those things within each department. So if each department doesn't have, for example, a communications person, is it reasonable to think that we'll have 14 communications people because we want one for each department? Or can we provide that service in such a way where they're distributed across the organization of their expertise, which is communications and engagement, and have enough partnership within each specialized service area to be able to support their work. So multiple schools of thought for that, but I would say organizations generally, both private sector and public sector, are moving more towards that shared services model. I could give more examples. IT would be an example. Geographic information systems might be an example. All of those different types of services that are, you have an expert in that field that can deploy their expertise across multiple other fields of work.
So a follow-up, so do you feel like you're seeing progress in the last 4 years as far as bringing together those shared services and seeing those economies of scale?
Council President, I think we've made progress. It is progress against 40 years of history. And so there are some financial implications to that, right? There's maybe a group is used to having direct service and they go to their teammate that works in the building that they work in. And so it's a little bit of growing pains from how does that impact the culture of the organization? They both have to move simultaneously, whether that's, a financial impact. One example might be there may be somebody already embedded in a department that isn't a centralized service. There's a way to think about that differently. It doesn't necessarily have to mean everything goes into the same department if our mindset is that we all work together to get the work done. So there could be a allocation, a cost and labor allocation coming the other direction from an entity if we're thinking like that. But it really needs to be about what is the result we're looking for versus, I guess in my mind, versus, oh, I don't have that, this other department does. I don't think that's how people think about it, but we're human beings, right? So folks would like to have the closest point be right where they're working, but I think we have to think about our work differently in order to make sure that we aren't the most expensive government, because just adding something so every single service area has the same thing is a great way for it to cost a lot of money,
Thank you.
which is not our goal, in case someone was listening just then. So budget optimization is also something we're looking at. So this is what Deputy Administrator Parrish was discussing. Every year, we're looking at all of these types of things across the budget before we ever bring a recommendation to you. It is not ever my goal to stand here and think, I didn't really need to ask for that from the City Council. My goal is to say we've looked through the budget to try to optimize it. And so based on conversations that started with the team back in October, the initial review of recommendations, we're tightening up the budget. So I would qualify this by saying you can't tighten up the budget every year without major political conversations. So about $1.7 million of revenue adjustments to the positive, which help absorb some costs. Some of those are building permit fee revenue. Some of those are in the public safety space based on what we've been seeing.
Can you pause a minute? Councilmember Miller.
I have a question after you finish
Okay.
with this.
And then about $1.3 million in expenditure adjustments. Some of those are structural things where when we really combed through, there was an example where something was moved to an equipment revolving fund. So we're annually reserving in order to replace something and the annual operating never got removed. So that's an easier one to make. But if that department was relying on that total in order to feel like they were getting to the end of the year, it's going to feel tighter to them. So this is across primarily tax levy related costs. So you can see when you're looking at your peak in your chart, our goal is to not have the same percentage peak. But again, you don't get to do these adjustments every year without actual changes to your services. So I just want to qualify it with that.
So my question is related to revenue, but on a different item. We recently approved a new structure for gas utility franchise fee. We have not historically charged a gas utility franchise fee. Might we expect a consideration of that revenue source potentially in this budget cycle?
Council President, Council Member, I don't know that it would be within this budget cycle. The actual hearing process that's necessary by statute to do that maybe would push it out towards the second year if that's something the council wanted to consider. But if the council wants us to look at that, the reason we had stopped looking at it, it had been a point of conversation 2-3 years ago before the sales tax became the focus. But during that time, there was a major rate increase in the natural gas space. So people were seeing their $200 a month bills go to like $400 and $500 a month. And so the political will for that shifted a little bit during that time frame. So if it's something the council would want us to look at, it's something that we could, but I wouldn't want to mislead you to thinking that it would be ready for like adoption in December. It might be, but again, it wouldn't necessarily, probably be better to understand that in context with what you would want to focus those, if you would want to focus those dollars towards something specific, you collectively, or have it just be adjustments to the tax levy.
And the reason I ask is because we've just talked about sustainability as a strategic priority, and many cities are using gas utility franchise fees to pay for additional rollout of those kind of programs that ultimately save people money on those services by improved insulation and other programs that improve the energy efficiency of their homes. So I just wonder how we think about, again, long-term sustainability and how we're passing on those benefits to our community beyond city operations. And that's an area I think of in that conversation of how we're promoting this in the community that go beyond city operations.
Thank you.
Continue.
So this is an example of those very specific things. I just would say these are currently contemplated as being baseline adjustments, so these would not be cuts in what I'm recommending to you. But I wanted to bring you some things that I would consider as having more direct service level impacts to the community. Because I don't want to make that decision for you. I think that's a policy level decision that the council should have. And of course, all of these don't add up to a huge amount of money, but it's approximately what was reduced from the budget in December of last year. So looking at potentially doing services differently. So if there's anything on this page that jumps out at you either today or in the future that you never want to see again before you on this dais, let me know. If there, for example, I've already heard about the fireworks. This would not be ending fireworks. This would be not having the day-long event leading up to the fireworks, but still having the fireworks. There's a cost to providing the music, the vendors, setting up the Soldiers Field location or any location for the day of festivities. And there's a separate cost within the budget that's just the fireworks. So that would be an example. If I think actually Parks and Rec is sort of recommending this $7,000 adjustment based on experiences that they have seen and value they think they could have for adaptive rec of using specific facilities and not leasing certain spaces. Tall grass and weeds gets a lot of love and hate every year, depending on which side of the tall grass you're on. The disease tree complaint process is talking about disease trees on private property that only threaten public property. So those are what currently Parks looks at is not, this wouldn't be boulevard trees and this wouldn't be a diseased tree on your neighbor's property threatening your property. That is a private civil dispute. And so then I'll just go back to the one that's probably I skipped over, which is the hours at the library and some of the other specific services that they provide. That would be a significant cost reduction, but also would be something that potentially would be able to reduce the budget. So there are things we could talk about more. There are things that we could share more details and specifics about and will during the budget process, whether that's, but again, these are currently included in the budget. The question is whether or not you'd like to talk about them more and whether you'd like to talk about removing them.
Thoughts?
Yeah,
Go ahead, Councilmember Fredericks.
one thing, if we're gonna close the library for 4 hours on a Sunday or something like this, would there be anything wrong with closing the library for the day? The public fireworks thing, obviously, you know, it's part of our country, it's part of our heritage here. You know, wanna keep that. Obviously, what I'm gathering from what you said, reading between the lines, maybe the festivities aren't well attended and stuff like that. It's maybe not great use of our funding. So if it don't make sense, obviously I trust the Parks and Rec to make those recommendations to us. But fireworks on the 4th of July in a community like this, I think it's a wonderful thing. And yeah, I think that's about all I have to say.
Can you clarify with the fireworks, is it the music that would be, so what
It's the
you're.
event, like the all-day event, the Fourth Fest event that has the vendors and the music would change. You could probably still have music with fireworks. The fireworks line item is like another $30,000 or $35,000.
So that's not on the
Separate
table
from
yet.
this. The question would be, do we have a day-long event, which sometimes gets rained out, and then we only move the fireworks because our contracts for the day-long event are for that day only, or you'd be paying a fair amount of insurance for them to remobilize. And it's usually, if it's bad enough weather, you still can't put people back out on the park because you'll destroy it. So can I not answer the question about the library? It's a
You can answer whatever
non-answer.
you want.
I think that's the is it, would there be a problem with closing the library for a day? I think that's the trouble with anything on this list, and it's in the eye of the beholder. If someone's main day that they're able to utilize the library is on a Sunday based on their work schedule, it's probably a problem for that person and that segment of the population. So this list of things brings with it some of the reality of, if we're really talking about cutting a budget, we would be talking about service levels and changing people's experience of government. And I'm not suggesting that we should, but these are the kind of it's not balancing a budget, it's trade-offs within a budget when we're talking about significant reductions that start to impact what people's expectations are of the community. I mean,
I appreciate this list, and we have three now in a row, so I'm gonna go to Keene, the mayor, and
Yeah,
and,
just,
Miller.
my comment was just that I looked at this as previewing recommendations.
Yeah.
I didn't think we were going through these today, so I'm not prepared, and nor do I think we should try to make decisions on this right now, so.
Mayor?
I had a question about reducing the Sunday hours. And it looks like there's a lot of different things that are kind of being picked at with the library. And so what would reducing 4 hours, what would those 4 hours be? Would they be in the morning when people are at church and not available? Or would they be in the afternoon, evening when people utilize it? And then if that is, how much of the amount that you've listed, I guess, would that reduction be?
I guess before you answer, Administrator Zones, I tend to agree with Councilmember Keene. I think your intention was to put these in front of us and not to discuss them now, but to know that when we get to that crunch point in August and September, that these are areas that we may or may not want to delve into. So I guess what we're being asked to do now is say, is there something here that a majority of us say, we don't want you to even keep this on the list? Is that a good way to?
yes, that I was looking
Assess
for visceral reactions, and we will come way more prepared to have deeper discussion if there's items that, if I hear no visceral reaction to any of the line items, I heard one visceral reaction.
And could I please follow up?
Go ahead.
I asked for that information in order to help
No,
determine
absolutely.
how I might feel about this. And so that's why I'm asking now.
Yeah,
I don't have that answer right now
Okay.
off the top of my head.
absolutely, absolutely.
So I will just say I would like that information. Give me just a second. For the next phase of the discussion. And also just, I don't know where it falls in here, but some of these are issues that for the newer ones like tall grass that are quite, you hear from the community about, and I hear from the community about. So we can have those discussions as we move forward and we hear more. But that information would be really helpful for me
Yes,
that
no,
I asked for.
very helpful. Councilmember Miller, then Councilmember Fredericks.
So my question, perhaps I missed this, is this a representative list, a sample, or is there a broader set of these?
The broader list adds up to $1.3 million, and those don't have the same types of implications
Okay.
as what was shown here.
Because thinking back to our foundational principles, adding inclusive decision-making and thinking about the timing of the budget of getting something in August, right? I wonder how we as council members might have a more robust conversation with our constituents about those feelings. I mean,
I
initially.
think you would have them about this list. The other list of things are structural things within the budget, or they were recommended by the department, and we discussed that it wouldn't have significant impact to their ability to do
So
their
we
work.
could take this as a representative full list for consideration of those modifiables for the
Of
August.
just this amount, there's
Yep.
another 1.3 million that already we're looking at not bringing in the recommended budget.
And just to clarify, we will see
I
that
I will give you a
1.3
representative list, but I mean, some of them are $500. So listing all of that adding up to $1.3 million, you will never get the budget done.
It'll be a little bit more
That's
expensive.
why we bring a recommendation at a pretty high level.
Yep.
Okay, because I think of the process, the feedback that we hear obviously is there should be more cuts. There's something should be done differently. And I would love a time horizon to have robust conversations within Ward 2. And I'm sure some of my colleagues would agree to bring back real nuanced conversation about these areas. Because
I'm not planning to bring you a detailed list and have a detailed study session about the $1.3 million that
Sure.
won't ever show up in the recommended budget.
that's fine. And I'll take these as a list that I will work going forward to August.
Or other things that people might bring up to you that they have concerns about.
And I guess that's my question of, are there areas that might be at risk that people would likely have concerns about, but might not find out about until August when we find out about a recommended budget?
I don't think anything from this list puts anyone at risk other than they have to be thoughtful about their budget throughout the year. I wouldn't have recommended it. It would have ended up on a longer list of this. I would say the bigger things out there are the $4 million worth of decision packages that were requested, which is almost equal to what we were hoping to reduce from the budget, which would be additional capacity within the budget. And in any given year, I have about $1 million or $1.5 million to work with if we're not trying to cut the budget and be at zero. I think the biggest thing is people perceive that we are cutting the budget. It is almost never going to be possible for you to reduce the amount of money that you're putting towards the budget unless you literally are jettisoning departments, because that 5-6% total personnel cost increase per year is always, unless you're reducing personnel, which means you're reducing services, which means you're not providing something, that's what cutting the budget means. You would have to literally be getting rid of things.
And does any summary of this, this 4.2 million in decision package requests?
That
come
will
to
all
council?
come with the recommended.
Both those that are approved and
Right,
not?
so if you go and look at the prior budgets, you see recommended, not recommended for both 26 and 27. And fascinatingly enough, sometimes you don't see the same requests year after year. So that is usually a signal to me that it was an idea that maybe wasn't a plan.
Councilmember Fredericks.
Time's up.
Yep. Okay.
This one always gets a lot of attention, the outside agencies. I'm just forecasting that I got a very significant number of requests. Typically, this is intended to be support for these organizations and not just constantly increasing. So we did go through and move this up within the process and met with each of the entities that was looking for an adjustment. This is where I'm thinking of my recommended budget being. You can see that the funding for 2025 for these was $838,000. The requests for funding were $180,000 more than that, which is not in alignment with what we were talking about with the rest of the budget. If these were the adjustments that were made, and I'll just point out the 125 live adjustment is contractual, but we're showing it here for reference. That would be about a 5% increase in the total amount provided, not equal across the different organizations, but trying to apply some of the context. If I still wouldn't recommend, if you went all the way to a higher number in 2026, that it be near that $1.1 million. So I did provide another thought process in the far right column of if you were really wanting to provide additional funding for different organizations to them, what I would suggest is a reasonable max based on the detailed information provided. You could do that, but again, that's coming from your tax levy. So looking at transitioning some of these in, but also recognizing that, for example, doubling the RDA, maybe there's a way to provide one-time funding, but that's a significant increase when it used to be $100,000 of support as recently as 2020.
Councilmember Doring.
I'm gonna hate to do this, but I'm gonna ask you to go back to the previous slide. I'm kind of like in no man's land down here, so it's okay. One more. I'm having a visceral reaction to any cut in library services. So you asked for that reaction. That's my reaction.
Thank
I'm
you.
looking forward to going back to Ward 6 and talking with constituents there about how they would feel with any reduction of any of the library services. I hear a lot from them that they want more robust library services. So any reduction in those services, I think, would be problematic for the constituency that I represent. My other question is, in these budget optimization discussions, if a constituent or if we have a suggestion for an optimization, what is the process to bring that forward?
I think you should send it to me and we can talk about it. And
Okay.
I will share either information about it or we could get more information from another individual, depending on how detailed it is.
That's great. My other nonprofit board experiences, they all have different budgeting rules, budgeting procedures. So I wanted to be clear about the procedures here.
And then you'll also have a series of public meetings where you
Yep,
could also
absolutely.
bring it forward if
Okay.
it's not recommended.
Sweet.
Great question. Thought? Reaction?
I won't forget about you over there. I'll try not to.
But magically, we have arrived at the policy considerations again. I won't reiterate them because I think you provided great feedback. And we are also going to turn back one more time, except I can't because we moved the chat, to the CIP, which maybe I'll just run through. This is currently what we have projected in the capital improvement plan. We will bring in detail the capital improvement plan, not including RPU. We are still working hard to align the Rochester Public Utilities budget process with the rest of the process, but we aren't quite there yet. So a lot of projects represented here, many different funding sources for these projects. I think we mentioned $9 million a year of tax levy goes to the capital improvement project. So if you look at the 2026 year, significant amount of that is coming from funds that are not the tax levy. I can't click again. Thanks. One more. And then also attached was the master fee schedule. Typically, we had been adopting this in December, where we were hoping, I guess, that you were going to agree to the fee schedule because it's kind of important for the budget to work out. But again, when we look at those, you may recall a wonderful conversations that we had about golf in 2022 and what is included in the budget for the master fee schedule is the continued adjustment of the golf fees, which are intended to go back to ongoing maintenance as well as moving it off the levy. The sewer charges are based on the 5-year rate study and growth management plan, as well as the cost index for public works fees. So there's explanation next to each of those. So we're hoping to get that adopted earlier in the process. Also, the capital improvement projects list so that we can then be focusing on some of the operations later in your process. We made it to discussion, but we had great discussion during the presentation. So appreciate that. I don't know if there's anything else.
Other thoughts? Councilmember Keen.
Yeah, again, I'll just make some kind of summary things here. Just one thing I kind of approach with what the economic factors are around us as we approach here. We've gone through these labor things, which was a huge thing. We went through the inflation stuff, and I think you've seen that reflected in this. We're probably not there as much as we were before, but we have this sort of thing where we've negotiated 4%, and I think that's sort of like baseline. That's where we're at. Some other things though, that like we are still experiencing like a 5% growth in residential property values. And when you've got it in the thing that's, 6% growth of value, but I do get concerned with that means that the same people living in the same house, they're not dealing with that 8-10% increases. They're seeing much higher than that. So those are concerns that I think we need to keep in forefront. I don't want to get into that whole how the process works, but when property values are going up and we're just concerned with saying like how much we're getting, individual homeowners are paying more. And that, that goes back and forth when in COVID, when a lot of the commercial property values went down, we saw a lot of problems with that. So those are the things in the background. The other big community thing that's happened here is we've just got done passing a big school referendum, which most people don't differentiate their tax bill from city, county, school. Everyone's tax bills are going up. And what I've been hearing is, in some, especially on some of the commercial, it's big. So that's the environment we're going into as we're doing this work in 2025. Budgets are still, we have got to have the financial discipline, and I really do appreciate how we approach this. But at the end of the day, they really are, what are your values and what are your priorities? And that's where you should be spending your money, and we should protect that we're not spending on things we're not calling our priorities. But the main metric that what I've watched is the story will be a 9% or 9.96% increase. The metric that I'm more concerned with is the tax capacity and how much the percent we're hitting on the tax capacity. I think we're right now at a 49% or so. We don't have that in the numbers today, but I'm really saying this more for my peers, that when you're watching how efficient we are using this, it's a little misleading because as the property values go up, it gives us some relief. But it is something that I watch is that I can compare community across community and say, are we out of control?
And I would just say, you're referencing a slide that you'll see in June and August, is that the net tax capacity for the current year, 2025, despite the changes you've seen in the overall tax collected is still the second lowest it's been in the last 12 years.
And is it like 49% now?
I believe it's 49 and change.
Okay.
But it's been over 50 before, and we've been under 49 and 48 percent tax capacity for like the last 12 years. So
Yeah, and-
we've
and
muted
just-
that.
Just for here, like you can sort of take that and say, are we really out of control, or compare it to a Des Moines, or you go out of state, well, bring it in state, but you can sort of get a feel for it. Everybody does different amounts of services, but the question is like, our taxes just, you'll hear just too damn high, or do we need a reference to know what that means? And I want to make sure we stay with some sort of reference, that we're not just, because we really have been adding to our expenses. We've made decisions to improve salaries to maintain people. We've made decisions to staff traffic engineers. We've done those things, and they cost money, and those are reflecting our values. But we have to make sure we don't get to the point of we're like ratcheting up the cost of government past the point that most people would consider it to be reasonable.
Councilmember Miller, did you? Oh. I had one thing that I wanted to reference, and you talked about how we have stayed pretty lean with our FTE count. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about kind of the role of professional consulting in particularly public works, community development, other places, because I think there's also a perception out there that that by not increasing FTEs, we're moving that to consulting services. And so, can you talk about kind of the philosophy of how we use professional services?
Thank you, Council President, council members. I would say it's part of the constant optimization of how we're doing service. You had a discussion at your last council meeting about, for example, contracting out the pavement index, and not utilizing interns who we haven't been able to hire. So it's really a question of what do we think will bring the best result for the most value to the community. We also, for example, when we do the mill and overlay project, that's a combination of city employees and contractors. So if you think about the way that, so we don't do the concrete insets for the inlets that are on the edge of the pavement, right? So the concrete work is contracted out. That's partially because it's not just people. We would have to hire people, like have something for them to do in the winter months. Also make sure that, do we really also want to buy all of the equipment that's necessary in order to do the work that's happening like 5 months out of the year? Or is it more optimal to consider that we are going to have a combination of employees and contractors, or employees in some very specialized work that we do? We have engineers, but we also still hire engineering services for some specialized work where it makes a lot more sense to have specialized work go to an engineering service and not hire a full-time person that maybe utilized very occasionally on that type of work. So we're always trying to have that optimization mindset of what is the best way to accomplish the work, recognizing that, having positions of one is probably a thing of the past. And if you're going to have one project of that nature in the year, it makes more sense to utilize a firm that's doing that across the country, or at least across, the state, than to hire a person who you're only going to use occasionally.
Thank you. Councilmember Miller.
Just two final comments from the whole presentation. One, Mr. Parrish mentioned that the valuation increase of lower cost, more affordable housing has been outpacing the cost or the valuation increases of higher cost housing or higher valuation housing. Is that a hypothetical, or is that a real thing we're seeing?
That was in that reassessment cycle.
Okay.
So a lot of different things influence the assessed value, but during the referenced cycle of the 2025 tax levy, for example, my home is in the over $400,000, and I had I think I was at like a 2% increase. Now, 2 years before that, I was like 11, and we were at 6 at the city of Rochester. So it was a period of time where I don't know if the neighborhoods that had that value of housing were in a reassessment year, or if that's some of that's the purchase price just went up more within that period of time, which influenced the assessed valuations
That's my
in those areas.
concern, is the supply and demand pressure on affordable housing. I mean, I know it's something that we're tracking and it comes up in the community, and I would just love to know more, exploring what that pressure is that's driving the valuation increase of the more affordable housing units.
And that was a one time that we saw that in the last
Yep.
set of notices of valuation. So I don't know that there's a trend.
Okay. My second just comment is that I noticed on we mentioned the growth over the 1980 to 2020 period. I think it's important in the staff and the question of how we're doing that. I also just noticed that we're growing our infrastructure, our roads, our fire hydrants, everything. It's outpacing our population growth, and it's just a concern, especially as how we develop and how much additional pressure we're putting on that future maintenance cost that will have levy impacts. So just a comment.
Mayor Norton.
This kind of follows Council President Schubring's comment. We talk about the 14% increase in staff or whatever, the
I think it's
FTEs.
17.
Yeah. And someone asked me about this the other day and I didn't have the answer, but it has to do with Bold Ford Unbound, with all the growth that they're doing. We know we have hired people for that. Do they count in our staffing or not, because they're supposedly like temporary or DMC related?
Council President, Mayor Norton, they count in our staffing, but I think that number was
Prior
from
to.
a prior year. So like it's probably, I don't know how much that would influence the percent from 1980 to the year that was referenced, but
Mhm.
those were just authorized within a recent budget, and that graphic is from 2 years ago.
Okay.
They do count. However, the thought process was that we would also look at succession planning, and
Mhm.
that this was like building up during a period of time where we have specific work. And so the intent, and I'll just repeat this for my friends that are wanting to request budget in the future, is not for those positions to get repurposed into something else unless there is a discussion of needing that.
Mhm.
That would still be like a decision package and a request. It is to look at succession planning, things that change, and you would potentially not fill another position or not fill that position as turnover would happen in the future.
And I appreciate that clarification. And then also DMC staff. Are those counted in our staffing?
Those are counted in our staffing. And so when that went from contractual to staffing, they count in our FTE count. But again, the funding is coming regardless of funding source. Another example would be, we used to staff the Civic Center with FTEs. We don't anymore, but we still have a cost in our budget for the operating contract. But those are FTEs that have fluctuated. Not that the service necessarily went away, but we're doing the service differently.
Thank you for clarifying.
Any final comments? Well, great discussion.
you.
Did you get
I got
any
so
last?
much. Thank you.
Yeah, good, good.
It was good budget discussion. I'm fulfilled until the next spreadsheet.
Thank you. We're going to take a 5-minute break and come back and talk about rules and procedure.
Recording stopped.
Our second item for this afternoon is City Council
Recording in
Rules
progress.
of Procedure and Code of Conduct Review. And Administrator Zelms, take it away.
Pick up on some time. We had great discussion on this overview of the rules of procedure. Legislative advocacy and outreach and the travel and training policies. Oh, they just hadn't turned me on yet.
Yeah,
They were
you
done.
are on now.
Primarily just going to go through this quickly as a high-level overview of the purpose of the council rules of procedure and code of conduct, a little bit of touch point about other parts of the charter, and then a slide about what change, the more significant changes were that were made over the last 2 years. So in general, you've got this in your packet, but realistically be thinking about how does this help your legislative process? How does it help you act as a body? This is an odd job to make decisions together and work together when maybe you weren't in the four that agreed to the decision. So just be thinking about it like that, how it helps you stay in your role as elected leadership and policymakers, and it helps city staff members stay in our role of the implementers of the policy and the day-to-day operations. It really is intended to help you to be respectful of each other, even when you disagree, thinking about time and resources and how we spend those effectively. And then really, honestly, having robust discussion on this, I like to call it the television show, is important to the community. The things that they hear you talking about and saying, your constituents, are how they understand whether they're represented on the council through who they've elected. So just a couple key provisions. These are clickable. Obviously, legislative authority vested in the Common Council. You have to have a regular meeting every month according to your charter. You have the authority to make these rules and change the rules, but you need 5/7 of yourself to do that per the charter. And then we talked about this a little bit earlier. You can't work for the city and be a city council member, and you also have to approve something by ordinance if you're going to adjust your salary for a future year. Apologies, I'm clicking again. So when you think about this, also in the ordinance, although it's listed on a slide called charter, you have the ordinance about conflicts of interest within the ethics portion of the code. And then just because I like to talk about myself, we do have the administrator, which is outlined within the city charter. So really this talks about the day-to-day operations of the city, bringing you an annual budget, et cetera, and all of the things that we try to do to make sure that what's on your agenda is necessary to be there. That is a component of it, but also making sure that if there are changes that you want to make to the priorities of the city, that we do that as a body. I try not to serve one of you more than the others, and that is both the blessing and the curse of the city administrator role. So again, the policy level is really that 50,000 foot view and down to maybe about the 20,000 foot view. You start getting into a lot more staff time when we're talking about delivering projects, the details, the task work, the day-to-day of getting the work done. And so this just is a good reflection of how those duties and responsibilities sometimes cross over a little bit, where there's more of the council role in establishing the vision and more of the staff role in carrying out the day-to-day operations to achieve that vision. So again, the main thing that are in your rules of procedure, I think of the rules of procedure about your meetings. How is your meeting going to go? That's really the rules of procedure section. A lot of that is really grounded in the Roberts rules, and that's the framework for how you tend to discuss policy items at your voting meeting. Perhaps less so at study session, which is a little bit more informal. Talks about the role of the president, make sure he does not veto anything when the mayor is gone. Most important part of the rules. And then also the order of business. So people expect a certain order on the agenda. Also remarks and debate, we talk about being respectful and courteous. And so it is a little bit of an odd way of approaching a discussion, that Robert's rules, but it really does help for especially contentious issues to make sure that you're moving forward, you're making the motions, and that some of the emotion of the motions is taken out of it because we're staying focused on decisions, et cetera. And then the code of conduct, it really is getting more into the roles and responsibilities. How do we work together? How do we make sure accidentally, most of the time staff doesn't go marching in a direction because they had a conversation with a council member, but rather were acting, in accordance with what the majority of the Common Council is looking to accomplish. Importantly, it tells you where you sit on the dais, things of that nature. You could change that. There are cities that do things differently. It also references your travel policy. And again, trying to get the roles and responsibilities right, have that clarity and have it be established in a process and procedure to make sure people realize it's not personal. A business meeting agenda, how you get on the agenda, the questions and the process that we use to send out the information, and information symmetry was how this was described. So you get a really long email from me on Monday that's trying to give you perspective on questions that were asked that maybe weren't as clear in the RCA. And so we provide a little bit more information for the city council to answer constituents or to determine whether you would want to pull an item from consent. And the reason that we try to get that by 1 o'clock is so you all can be prepared. If you aren't expecting someone to pull a consent item, you might not have read it as much in depth, or you might not have considered some of the things that you would want to be saying in order to sway someone to your opinion. It also lets us make sure the right staff are here to answer your questions and to make sure they don't have to be here if we don't think there's a need for them to come and stick around with us. Not that this isn't a wonderful meeting that everyone should want to come to, but not everyone wants to be here at 10 o'clock at night. So direction to staff for projects, those are some of the key provisions. We talked about that a little bit, interactions with staff, and then requests for information on non-agenda items. You've probably already encountered some of this. Something that's not in your code of conduct, but was adopted by a motion in December of 2023 is how we've been navigating some of the legislative priorities and letters of support. We get asked by different organizations to support their initiatives. We try really hard not to compete with initiatives that the city already has. That doesn't mean that we don't, sometimes staying silent is tacit support. It's kind of unique up at the legislature. And we have a process for when we are going to send a letter of support, a process for reviewing that, who signs it, and then, again, the submittal through the legislative director. So it's something that you could adopt within your rules of procedure, but I just wanted to make sure you are aware it has been adopted. It's just not in your rules of procedure. It was approved on December 11th, 2023. Something else that's referenced in your code of conduct is about travel and training. We mentioned earlier that the amount for 2025 is $15,034. We just asked that you go through a process to request the training. I don't think I've ever had someone request training that didn't seem to align with a council, council goals and city work. But I guess it could happen. And then making sure that if you do want to do something that's beyond the apportionment, that is a possibility. It's just that we need to put that on the council agenda to make sure that the city council is authorizing something that's outside of the scope of the travel policy for out-of-state travel, or apportioning the dollar amount to do that. I will turn this over to Mr. Spindler-Craig.
Thank you, City Administrator Zelms, Council President Schubring, council members, Mayor Norton. I will be fairly brief in these next 3 slides, not because the topics aren't important, but because you've spent a fair amount of time in this space already, either through prior council discussions or through your council onboarding. The materials that you're seeing are good reference materials to you going forward. You've seen iterations of these slides previously. There's a mix of citations as well as links to substantive documents that you'll want to keep in mind going forward. Just a couple of things to say about this topic generally, though. This is, there's layering of authority documents relevant to this discussion of ethics ordinance and gift law. Those layerings are state law that's specific to gifting. There's a charter provision, so your constitutional provision regarding gifting, as well as the actual ordinance that puts ethics review into practice through the Ethics Commission. All of those items, again, are referenced through this slide. In summary, though, I think just want to reference a few things and sum it up. No gifts of more than nominal value. If you remember nothing else, no gifts of more than nominal value from anyone who is interested in your council work cannot be taken. There's some nuance to that, of course.
Can
And the
you
reminder that,
pause there for a minute, Councilmember Wall.
And the nominal value, Mr. Splendor Craig, is set by state statute at $5?
It is.
Okay.
Yes.
When I first came on the council more than 2 years ago, I thought that was going to be a real problem. It hasn't turned out to be a problem because it's easy to say no. But $5, how long has it been $5? That is such a nominal value.
To your point, it has not been adjusted for inflation. It's been $5 for a long time. I'm not sure where really $5 originally came from, what was special about that threshold, but it's been $5 for a long time.
Because that's a Starbucks or a $5 or a $10 cup of coffee or whatever. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. You're welcome.
Mayor Norton.
A question came to me recently that I hadn't had asked quite in this way before, but if you get a logoed item, for instance, RCTC mug, or we give out things as a city at events, kind of those kinds of things, or a cap with a union logo on them, how do those fall in this area?
There's maybe a couple of different questions there, Mayor. If we are receiving, I would say pay attention to who it's coming from and whether that is an entity that is interested in the work that you are doing, or a vote that is coming up, or some sense of funding for that particular organization. It may be a question of nominal value versus not. And then I think the second piece of that is us giving things away is less of a gifting question and more of a public purpose question, and just assuring that whatever it is that the city is doing is in the interest of the city as a whole and is not being given out, I guess I would say, frivolously.
Yeah, I want to clarify. I wasn't asking about us giving. I was using that as an example. Those cups that have the city logo, RCTC, for instance, when you attend an event or when they come to visit, you might bring an RCTC mug that is similar to something we might give as a city. If it is logoed, is that considered a gift, or is that marketing from? Because I had been told that there might be a little bit of a difference between a marketing item and a gift per se. And I wasn't clear about that, but I was seeing if you had a way to help us.
And again, you're talking about for us receiving something from somebody else that may be logoed in some manner.
Exactly, like RCTC or like Women in Construction or like any number of things that we go to where they may be giving away or hand us, thank you for coming, and might come to your office to visit, for instance, and hand you something that is a logoed item from that business or entity.
I think I understand your question, and I would say that the logoing or marketing piece of it is really irrelevant. I think it's yet a question of nominal value or not. And
so,
again, the question of interested person or party as well.
So both of those, it's not one or the other, it's both of those that you would weigh?
Correct.
And then there are times when we get gifts as a city or as mayor that are given to us, and it's not a yes or no kinds of things. The way we have taken it is it's a gift to the city and it remains in City Hall for perpetuity. Like our sister cities, for instance.
Correct. The city as a whole can receive gifts, and it's appropriate for the city to receive gifts, and we do. And we have a process, and we need to remind our teammates now and then to make sure that we follow that process so that the council is formally accepting the gift to the city. Yes. No other questions for now?
You have more on your list?
Very briefly.
Okay.
The other two slides. What you'll see here is just a little bit of the language from the ordinance itself, which is reminding you of your high-minded work. And then the third slide that I'm presenting on is really just the detailed version of the ethics ordinance, gets into some of the nitty-gritty and really some of the specific financial conflict of interest scenarios that are really the heart of the ethics ordinance. In addition to just the general no gift takeaway for you, what I would just remind you of, and I think I've told you all before, these things will pop up here and there in a variety of iterations and oftentimes in a time-sensitive way. Please reach out to City Administrator Zelms or me, and we'll talk it through. Sometimes it's obvious and it's a question of just problem solving. How do you deal with that? Sometimes it's gray areas, and we'll just work that through with you. Of course, the important thing is to stay within the bounds of the law and ethics ordinance. And none of us, of course, want to be embarrassed either through the process.
I'm gonna ask for you to advance the slides, but those are basically the when in doubt, reach out slides. So the recent updates, we did adjust the regular meeting time to 6 p.m. and adjust the study sessions to 3:30 p.m. on days when there's not a regular council meeting scheduled. Established the 2-minute time limit for public speakers during open comment, which doesn't change anything about the public hearing portion of the meeting. And then I believe this was actually in 2022, but there was an adjustment to the selection of council boards and commission liaisons. If you'd ever seen the prior verbiage, it was I didn't fully understand what it meant, but we had changed it. And so it did used to have some amount of prior years of service, and then reverse order is where I started losing me. Reverse order for the next rotation until all positions were filled. And I'm not sure what that is, reverse order of what rotation of the same committees or commissions, and then priority to lower numbered wards if there were equal years of service. So that is not in your current rules of procedure, but I wanted to point it out because it has been pointed out to me before. And then we had changed that to be recommended without the whatever reverse order till the next rotation and lowest number ward means to any seated council president. And then we did clarify.
That is not the method I used this year.
We hadn't used it for some years. And then added clarifying language to Appendix A. Really, that was because there was a change to, I'm on the last bullet and I'm reading the second to last bullet. Oh, right, we had tried to address the challenge of open comment being sort of literally the word open, by just suggesting that people stay focused on things that the city council could influence locally at the local jurisdiction, and then updating the language because there was a change to open meeting law regarding ability to join remotely, although it didn't change that much, but we did change that language. So again, I don't know if there's any desire to make any vast changes to your council rules. It is something that really is a question for the council and only the council, and it requires 5/7 of you if you want to make any changes to your council rules. So that I would just stand for any questions or listen to discussion.
Well, I'll start off, and as you might imagine, I've read through the rules and guidelines many times, and what strikes me is that it is largely written, as you said, to prevent certain types of behavior, which I agree are necessary guardrails. While it states in minute detail how we as elected officials, what we must not do and how we should interact with city staff, I think it's lacking in best practices or processes on how we should deliver public policy to meet the needs of our residents. In some ways, I believe they constrain us from engaging in a free flow of ideas, options, and engagement with Rochester stakeholders and with each other and our professional staff, which I believe are all necessary for building effective policy. I'd like to see us undertake an examination of our framework of decision-making to ensure effective public engagement, transparency, and adequate time for deliberation. I don't have any specific proposals today, but I do believe we should explore potential options to refresh and open up our procedures, including ways to lengthen the glide path to our decisions on high-impact issues. Currently, the public and council members have 5.5 days to absorb a proposal, gain public input, and in many cases, one opportunity to deliberate amongst ourselves and provide meaningful input to impact a proposal. So what I would recommend is that we create a task force of 2 to 3 council members along with appropriate staff to explore options to make our decision-making process more robust and transparent. Some of the areas that we should explore is clarifying the objectives of our study sessions, re-examining our agenda setting process, and consideration of council committees as a first stop for key proposals to provide the council and public input prior to a final vote by the full council. So with that, I'll let my council colleagues share any questions or comments they have. Councilmember Wall.
That was a lot, President Schumer.
That's why I suggested a task force and I wasn't proposing anything specific.
I am going to be very specific, and that has to do with selection of council boards and commission liaisons. I think that perhaps our president was placed in an uncomfortable position in January as past procedure and current procedure conflicted to a degree. And the changes we made were on in November of 2023. So we've, I think that maybe we're at a time, and there are only a couple of us seated here that can speak to November of 2023, but I think maybe we were so focused on some other issues that we glossed over that. I don't remember any significant engagement about the change in how council members would be appointed to committees. So if there's a task force or whatever it is, and Mr. Palmer, I know, has considerable interest in this, I would like him to be able to weigh in on this as well before we as a council would necessarily say what is currently in our rules and procedures is that process by which we would commit for coming years. But maybe Mr. Keene can add.
Member Keen.
The only thing, no, I would say in November of 2023, it was the part of the code of conduct that was more focused on meetings and council interactions. It was not on the procedures for appointments. That is hard to, set up in these rules, because as you see over time, things change, like certain committees have gone away, others have come about. So to try to memorialize it in our procedures, I think is a difficult thing. I think right now, the idea of having the council president do that drafting and then the council approve it, I think is okay. I'm not, I'm trying to come to here open to President Schubring's kind of different ideas of like, we need to do this, but I also worry that there's a certain amount of like lag and stall that's going to be put in here that is, doesn't work well with the cadence of the way the council works right now. I think the problems of trying to solve that, like that longer term, getting things into the public that they're interested in before we're voting on them within a week. I agree with that, but I also think we do a pretty good job of that through a combination of existing study sessions, our NIMS, our kind of public hearings. But I'm open to looking at that kind of stuff. I came here, the couple of things that were on my mind are much smaller. It's like we did these changes to say 6 o'clock. I think that's working, but I want to be open to say, our meeting structure changed dramatically during COVID and afterwards. Do we have the right meeting structure right now with the every other week study session 2 a month? Or should that be, so I'm more interested in that side. But the other thing I'm open to too is we did a thing of moving our open comment meeting from 4 minutes down to 2 minutes. I'd be comfortable at 3 minutes. I think right now, when I watch the flow of our meetings, I think we're not fighting a lot of issues with that. So those are the kind of things I came with. I tried back in 2023, we had the same meeting with a new council to talk about the seating arrangements, because when I came in, it had just changed. But there was no appetite for it, and I'm okay with the way it is too. You can leave the seating the way you want it and change how the voting happens. But again, I just don't see what big problem we're solving with those right now. So I wasn't bringing them up.
Councilmember Miller, then Councilmember Fredericks.
Yeah, just a couple of specific comments to build on Councilmember Keen. I agree that I've been thinking about the study session supply of time. We've had some recent very full study sessions that have felt like we have not had as robust of a time for discussion as I would have liked. And I wonder about the fifth Monday that occasionally appears in our calendar, which currently has no regular meeting and no study session on, as a potential place to add a little time. And in the glide path, I also wonder that I don't see here as the role of boards and commissions outside of planning and zoning, which has an official role within the UDC, for perhaps other boards and commissions where we invite community members to take a more intensive role in a topic, an area. I have not appreciated that there is a formal process that I hear from those discussions. Obviously, they're open to the public. I can attend, sometimes I do. But I would be interested in perhaps a task force type arrangement to look at that area of engagement too. And then I've also heard that both Councilmember Wall and the mayor had attended sessions at the National League of Cities looking at public engagement and best practices there. I would love to hear more about that, explore those topics, because I share Councilmember Keen's comfort with 3 minutes. I've recently been at other public meetings where I've seen 3 minutes. Feels like it gives a little bit more time for people who are approaching us or approaching a body to be able to not be experts at a 2-minute argument. And I would love to have a little more flexibility and lower the barrier to people feeling comfortable approaching us in that space. I don't think it's a substitute for other robust engagement, but I do think it's a point of something that I would be comfortable exploring a return to, or a move up to 3 minutes. And those are my comments.
I just would like to I know you didn't ask a question, but I just would offer that the idea of having council subcommittees, I guess is what I would call them, and having items go to a subcommittee of council before they come to the whole council could be contrary to what we're talking about good public engagement, because if people think that based on the folks that are sitting in that meeting, that it's possible that it will pass the entire council, but then we go to the entire council and it's a very different sentiment, it could send some very mixed messages to the community. So I would just say, like, I think we would want to have some time with this, of understanding what the value and what some of the drawbacks might be. I share your concern about slowing things down. And I guess I would also say we want to take that in context with the charter, which very clearly says that the council agenda is set by the city administrator. I'm not saying I have to set it, but it's not really a council rules of procedure change. That would be a substantive change to the charter, depending on what the desire was for that. And depending on what the item is, if it's a subset of council, I think there are implications for the open meeting law. And but I would like to hear from the city attorney. And so I think we would want to have a lot of discussion before coming back with, and I realize it was pretty wide open and you have to give some examples in order to make something wide open make sense. But I do think that depending on what the ideas are, there could be some complications. And for example, we have state law to comply with when we're talking about planning and zoning and shot clocks for certain things, and expectations and entitlements. So I think, yes, and it sort of depends. And then of course we have only so many days of the week to have a committee meeting, to have advance notice to when the next meeting is going to happen, pull the packet together. There's a lot of things that happen behind the scenes in order to have any of those meetings occur in a way that is meaningful for the community.
Yes, I'd like to respond to that and Councilmember Keen's initial piece on the study session. I mean, one, as I proposed it as a task force because I know there are a lot of questions and there's a lot of ways that you can go when it comes to committees. I know that the county uses committees. My previous public service role at the Metropolitan Airports Commission uses very standard committees, and you can have committees where you may have four council members that are committee members, but it still is an open meeting. Other council members can go to that. So there are a lot of iterations you can do. But to Councilmember Keen's point, I do believe that the study sessions can perform the function that I'm looking at. And I think we saw it a few weeks ago where when we were talking about the pavers on the Peace Plaza, we had a study session discussion on those pavers, and then within a week and a half, it was a decision to make. So that's what I'm looking for is, I think study sessions, we will often get really large issues, and then they may come back to us 2 months, 3 months, 4 months later, and in a more detailed proposal. What I'm looking at is when we have very high impact decisions to make, to really give us a couple bites at the apple so that we can assess public impact, that we can have greater deliberation between ourselves and more informal deliberation with our professional staff as well. So those are the kind of things I'm looking at, and I think it's, as I said, worth a discussion among council members as to where the comfort is on that kind of change, and whether it's, you know, we try a few different things, or we as I mentioned, clarify our study session times to include framework like that. So I'll stop there, and it looked like Mayor Norton.
Thank you. I think it's interesting, whether it be a task force or, you know, short-term task force that would look into this, or a committee. Task forces are more short-term, or whether it be the use of a study session. I think there are many issues here, and I'm going to add a couple that I would like you to look at. We changed a couple years ago the process for filling a vacancy when the president leaves town, takes a vacation, and we did it in a way that just said, if it's January, it's Ward 1, if it's February, it's Ward 2. I would argue that that has not always served us the best, and that while it's nice to let everyone have a chance at a discussion, and the chair has the prerogative to fill that, I think just setting a chair and a month is not the best way to handle that. And one of the rationales for that is not everyone's comfortable running meeting, for one, and it kind of puts you in the position where you have to, whether you like it or not, rather than the option of doing it. And number two, when I'm out of town, and there were 2 instances I could think of in the last couple of years where I had a vacation or was out of town, and the chair was sick or was out of town as well. And then that means, you know, a person is not only the chair of the meeting, also becomes the mayor for a day. And I think it would be wiser to have a more thoughtful discussion and allow the chair, and perhaps the chair and the mayor, to make those decisions about who would fill in at certain times, rather than just having it be A, B, C, D, E. So I would just say that's something that's concerned me a couple times over the last few years that I would like us to revisit. Also, we have this, because of the way our strange charter is. Yes, I believe this committee could even make recommendations for a charter change, but it's very difficult to do and very complicated and very, you know, it would be very time consuming. But even on some decisions we've made here, we get confused about the mayor's role, which at least our charter commission, and sometimes the way the charter is written and viewed, the mayor's position is seen as executive, like a judicial, legislative, and executive. When you go to their meetings and they've talked, they say, oh, well, the mayor's the executive branch. That's how they view it. But it doesn't really have the same authority, except for veto authority, as an executive branch. And yet, there are other decisions that are made here where, and I give you the example of RDA or other committees that we serve on, where the council made a decision that they shouldn't vote. But they also made that decision for me. Well, if I'm an executive branch and you're a legislative branch, we have different jobs, but we haven't always thought of it that way. We've treated the mayor and the council exactly the same. And there are other examples we could go into. So I hope as we move forward and have some of these discussions, that really think about the division of labors that we have, what the charter says, and you know, if you guys decide something for yourself, does it mean that the mayor has to live under that same rule? Or is the mayor's position somewhat different and should be treated differently, and in what instances? And we haven't always given that a lot of thought. So I just throw those out.
Councilmember Keen.
Yeah, again, I know there's a lot of topics on the table here now because the code has so many different things with different kinds of rules. But I'm going to try to go back to Council President Schubrick's thing with like the order and basically the contemplative thing towards these big votes. Underneath that, the suggestion for the task force, but in my view, the suggestion for the task force is the bigger change to our operation than the other one. And I think we shouldn't do that willy-nilly. I think we should, I mean, are we going to be a task force sort of, or a committee structure? I know that back in 2019, one of my first years here, we did an ad hoc one, and we ended up in trouble with it, with the exact thing you talked about, that the committee ended up going in a certain direction that the council wouldn't accept. And then you end up causing this sort of thing. So before we get into whether we do this idea of like breaking off task forces, to me, we've sort of assumed we can start doing that. But to me, that's the bigger policy question in the council, or in the council right now, than what we use it for.
Can you clarify a little? So when I think of council committees, it's this body,
Right.
it's just us in a different format. It's not, it's us, you know, if you have two council committees and you have 4 members of each and the other 3 members can attend those meetings, but the council itself is the ultimate decision maker. So I guess I'm kind of, and these are discussions that I would see us working out in a
So again,
task
let me
force.
see if I can just respond and
Yeah.
I mean, we're in front of me right now is our rules of operation, and they're suggested things that we can always change, and they're within our supermajority ability to change. But I still have this like higher standard thing that as a council member, I only have authority in the old world of committee as a whole, when the 7 of us are together, making decisions. When the meeting adjourns, I don't have authority to make city decisions. And I do know there's cases where I have been asked to be on an RPU committee, and somebody else has been asked to represent the city here and there. Those are legislative and things like that. But what I think we're leaking into right now is like, no, we can go off in groups of 2s or 3s or 4s or 5s and have authority as like making things for the city. And we could do that. There's nothing in our charter that says we can't do that, but we don't right now. So I'm reacting to the idea like, oh, we're going to start operating that way. I'm going to say that's a big deal. And so that's what I'm trying to.
I see. So you're responding to the task force itself.
I'm responding to the idea of subcommittees, or call it task force, but this idea that we're going to say Councilmember Wall and Councilmember Miller are going to go off and come back with a recommendation to this group. We don't do that right now. We could, and that's what I think you're suggesting, but that's in my view, a change. And whether that's them 2 or 3, and whether they're more interested in it, I'm going to say it again. That's a big change to me, because I have this view that I have city authority as a member of 7, not as an individual leaving this room, or not with meeting Councilmember Wall for coffee tomorrow morning. We're going to make some things, or I mean, in some ways that starts colliding with what the staff's responsibility starts colliding with open meeting. So that's why I'm not saying I couldn't support it. I'm saying let's be clear what we're doing.
Councilmember Fredericks.
I'll go for a short one at this. How's that sound? I think what you're trying to say is you just want to have more input on what our agendas are going to be, whether it be for our study sessions or our council meetings. You want to have more input before it just comes to us and is laid in front of us. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
I think that may be part of it, but I think it's also, yes, more input before things are
Baked.
completed. And we are at our Monday meeting, and it may be after, a very agenda-packed meeting and we have to make a decision
Right.
that day. Yes.
And
So
not
it,
just-
it frees us up on those high-impact issues.
Right. And the next issue is us 7, 8, don't get to sit down and just visit and talk about things and go through things. And I don't get to sit and hear what you guys are thinking and learn from you and all this stuff. We're always put on public display and not force, but all of a sudden we're making these decisions where we haven't even, none of us have even talked to each other about it. That it happens often. And maybe I'm alone in that, but you know, I'm trying to abide by the rules. I'm trying to do things right, make every effort I can. But it's like, I've gotten to know you pretty well. I haven't gotten to know the rest of all these people really well because of the parameters we have to operate in. And I would like to talk with you guys more openly and candidly and get to know you better and all those things, because I stand to learn a lot from that.
Mr. Spindler, Craig, you had something to add?
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. That's maybe a good segue, and Councilmember Keen opened that door as well. I don't want to get ahead of the ideas or the conversation, but yes, the open meeting law is a significant dynamic here and a significant guardrail to all of you. Not sure exactly what is being contemplated with the idea of a work group or a committee. But I would just tell you that that's a frequent point of conversation with other public bodies. And the general rule is that subcommittees, committees, whatever you call them, are treated as sort of a separate public body that is obligated to a public conversation and posting of meetings and notice and recording and the data dynamics of us managing those as well. So just want to put that out there, that to the extent that that's where some of the idea or conversation goes, we would just need to problem solve through some of those limitations and obligations under the law.
Councilmember Doring.
Yeah, thank you, President Schubring. I'm grateful that you brought this idea forward. The part of your idea that is most intriguing to me and would be most beneficial to me in representing the constituents that put me in this chair would be an extended length of time to gather public input from them on especially high impact agenda items. I have found myself at times wishing that I would have more time to garner that feedback before being put in a position to make a decision, just because I want to represent them well. It would also be beneficial for me to have more of a heads up of things that are coming on an agenda, so I don't have for example, I had someone call me today saying, next week on your council agenda, you're going to be talking about this. And I was like, wow, I had no idea that was happening. So I don't, am I put in a position where I'm trusting that they know more information than I am, that I haven't seen the information they're going to provide so I can actually engage in a dialogue with them. So I like the idea of a task force being put into place to study or to come up with some ideas about how we can, as a governing body, be more engaged and get more time to have public input on our decision-making process.
Thank you. So,
Much like the strategic priorities, we will synthesize what we heard today and come back to you with what we think is viable and what the implications of a task force are, because I think what maybe got missed is that your task force would be a public meeting. So you might just want to have a study session.
and thanks for clarifying that, Administrator Zelmzik, because that's what, I think the goals, Councilmember Doring did a good job of crystallizing what I feel about it as well, and the process as to how we make decisions to get to a place like that is, I want to make sure that we are following our open meeting and guidelines to get there.
Thank you. I'm good if you're good.
All right, any other comments, suggestions? Thank you, good discussion. Now, Administrator Zelms, if you can give us a preview of study session.
Yep, your next study session is in May, and I don't have the calendar in front of me, so I'm going to guess a date. Oh, there it is. Thank goodness, May 12th. I was going to guess right. I did just want to point out that the annual bus tour is typically a little bit longer than 6:30, usually around 7:30 or so. So it is a good opportunity to engage with each other, which was discussed earlier. So we have that all scheduled out, hopefully with enough time to have, good discussion, but also build some rapport, see things on the ground throughout the city. And that's your main meeting that you have for study sessions in May. And then you can see what's forthcoming on June 9th. And that's all I have.
All right, I'm going to turn it over to, Councilmember Miller, go ahead.
Sorry, just a clarification about the schedule. I see that on June 9th, we have UDC downtown parking, and then on July 28th, we have DT parking to UDC update. Are those distinct topics?
I believe that they are distinct. Maybe they aren't.
That sounds like a duplicate. I'll double check.
They're a duplicate.
Thank you.
I think it in part was because it may be that you'd be coming back with actual language in the UDC, but that doesn't have to happen in that way.
Sorry, part of the reason they moved too was because we wanted those two discussions to be on the same meeting. So downtown parking did change.
I will turn it over to Attorney Michael Spindler-Craig to walk us through our next agenda item.
Thank you, Mr. President. Consistent with the posted agenda, this is the point when we would move into closed session. This is the type of closed session that does require a formal motion and vote by the body. The language that I would suggest that you use is that you move into closed session pursuant to Minnesota Statute 13D.03 subdivision 1B to discuss strategies for labor negotiations.
So move.
Moved by Councilmember Wall,
Second.
seconded by Councilmember Miller. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no, nay. Motion passes. We are adjourned.
Recording stopped.